I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. The muddy footprints weren't there when I went to sleep. I stood frozen in the doorway of the bedroom, my eyes fixed on the trail of brown smears leading from the hall to the foot of my bed. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I knew I was alone in this cabin. I had to be alone. But those footprints told a different story. I had jumped at the chance to house Ed for my aunt and uncle while they were on vacation. A week alone in a beautiful cabin in the woods, away from the noise and stress of the city. It sounded like paradise. And for the first few days, it was. I spent my time hiking, reading, and enjoying the peaceful solitude. But then the noises started. At first, I dismissed them as the usual sounds of a house settling or animals scurrying about outside. This was the woods, after all. But as the week wore on, the noises became more distinct, more deliberate. Footsteps on the porch, scratching at the windows. Once, I could have sworn I heard breathing right outside my bedroom door. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my imagination was running wild in the unfamiliar surroundings. But now, staring at those muddy footprints, I couldn't deny it any longer. Someone had been in the cabin while I slept. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to move, to follow the trail of footprints. They led from the bedroom, down the hall, and to the front door. My throat tightened as I noticed smears of mud on the doorknob. Whoever had been here had let themselves in. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. But as the phone rang, a sickening realization washed over me. I was miles from the nearest town. Even if the police believed me, it would take them at least an hour to get here. I was on my own. The operator's voice crackled through the speaker, asking about my emergency. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat as I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps on the porch, coming towards the front door. I ended the call without a word and bolted for the bedroom, my heart racing. I slammed the door shut and fumbled with the lock, my fingers clumsy with fear. As the lock clicked into place, I heard the front door open. Someone was in the cabin. I pressed my back against the door, straining to hear any sound of movement. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps, coming down the hall, towards my room. My eyes darted around the bedroom, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. The window was too small to climb through. There was nothing I could use to defend myself except a lamp on the bedside table. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I held my breath, praying that whoever was out there would leave, that this was all some horrible mistake. A soft knock made me jump. "Hello?" A man's voice called out. "Is anyone home?" I remained silent, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it through the door. "I know you're in there," the voice continued, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I saw you through the window. Why don't you come out so we can talk?" My mind raced. He had seen me. When had he been watching the cabin this whole time? "Go away," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I've called the police. They're on their way." A low chuckle came from the other side of the door. "No, you haven't. I heard you hang up before you could tell them anything. It's just you and me out here." I felt the blood drain from my face. He was right. In my panic, I had ended the call before giving the operator any information. No one knew I was in trouble. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I just want to talk," he replied. "Why don't you open the door? I promise I won't hurt you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of his request, as if I would willingly open the door to someone who had broken into the cabin in the middle of the night. "Please," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "just leave. Take whatever you want and go. I won't call the police, I swear." There was a long pause. For a moment, I dared to hope that he had taken me up on my offer and left. But then I heard a soft thud against the door, as if he had leaned his forehead against it. "I'm afraid I can't do that," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You see, what I want is you." A scream built in my throat, but before I could release it, I heard a loud crash from somewhere in the cabin. The man outside my door cursed, and I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Then, realizing this might be my only chance to escape, I unlocked the door and peered out into the hallway. It was empty. I crept down the hall, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached the living room, I saw what had caused the crash. A large branch had fallen through one of the windows, shattering the glass and scattering shards across the floor. And there, silhouetted against the broken window, was a figure. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden in shadow. He turned towards me, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic in his hand. I didn't wait to see what it was. I turned and ran, bolting for the front door. I could hear him behind me, his heavy footsteps gaining ground. I threw open the door and plunged into the darkness outside. The night was moonless, the woods around the cabin a wall of impenetrable black. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face and arms, roots threatening to trip me with every step. But fear drove me forward, the sound of pursuit spurring me on. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away, had to find help. But as I ran, a terrifying thought occurred to me. What if he knew these woods better than I did? What if he was herding me, driving me deeper into the wilderness, away from any chance of rescue? As if in answer to my fears, I heard his voice, closer than I expected. "You can't run forever," he called out, a hint of laughter in his voice. "I know these woods like the back of my hand. There's nowhere for you to go." I changed direction, veering off to the right. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed myself harder. I couldn't let him catch me. I wouldn't. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rocks and branches tearing at my skin. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and disoriented. As I struggled to my feet, I realized I couldn't hear him anymore. Had I lost him? Or was he simply waiting, watching from the darkness? I looked around, trying to get my bearings. In the distance, I saw a faint glow. Lights, a house, or maybe a road. Hope surged through me. If I could just make it there. I set off towards the lights, moving as quickly and quietly as I could. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me flinch, certain that he was right behind me. But I pressed on, the promise of safety driving me forward. As I got closer, I realized the lights were coming from a gas station. I could see the glow of the fluorescent lights, the silhouettes of gas pumps. I was so focused on my goal that I didn't notice the roots sticking up from the ground until it was too late. I fell hard, crying out as pain shot through my ankle. I tried to stand, but my leg buckled beneath me. Panic rose in my throat as I realized I couldn't run anymore. "Found you," a voice said from behind me. I turned, my heart sinking as I saw him emerge from the shadows. He was holding a knife, the blade glinting in the faint light from the gas station. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Please don't hurt me." He crouched down beside me, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. I flinched away from his touch. He said, his voice almost gentle. "I told you, I just want to talk. You should have listened to me back at the cabin. Things didn't have to get so." Messier closed my eyes, waiting for the bite of the knife. But instead, I heard a new sound. Car tires on gravel, growing louder. My eyes snapped open. A car was pulling into the gas station, its headlights sweeping across the trees where we were hidden. The man cursed, looking between me and the approaching vehicle. In that moment of distraction, I acted. I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it in his face. He reeled back, temporarily blinded, and I seized my chance. Ignoring the pain in my ankle, I half ran, half crawled towards the gas station, screaming for help. The last thing I remember is the bright glare of headlights, the sound of car doors slamming, and voices shouting. Then, mercifully, darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by concerned faces. The police had questions, of course. So many questions. But all I could think about was those muddy footprints leading to my bed. The sound of his voice outside my door. The glint of the knife in the darkness. They never caught him. The police searched the woods, but found no trace of the man who had terrorized me that night. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I wonder if he's still out there, still watching, still waiting. And I know that I'll never feel truly safe again. Story 2. The photos on the wall showed people sleeping, people I'd never seen before, but somehow looked familiar. My flashlight beam trembled as I moved it across the cabin's grimy interior, illuminating dust motes swirling in the air. I'd been lost in these woods for hours, stumbling through the growing darkness, relief flooding through me when I'd spotted the dilapidated structure through the trees. Now, standing inside, that relief curdled into dread as I took in my surroundings. The cabin was small, just one room with a rusty pot-bellied stove in one corner and a sagging cot in the other. But it was the wall opposite the door that held my attention. Dozens of photos were tacked up, overlapping each other in a disturbing collage. Each one showed a different person, men and women of various ages, all captured in the vulnerability of sleep. I moved closer, my hiking boots crunching on the debris-strewn floor. The faces in the photos were slack, unaware. Some were clearly in beds, others looked to be sleeping in cars, or even outdoors. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what I was seeing. Whoever took these photos had been watching these people, invading their most private moments without their knowledge. A gust of wind rattled the cabin's loose boards, making me jump. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. But there was only darkness beyond the threshold, the woods outside now pitch black. I hadn't meant to be out this late. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, a chance to clear my head and enjoy the autumn colors. But I'd gotten turned around somehow, my usually reliable sense of direction failing me. As the sun began to set, panic had set in. That's when I'd spotted the cabin, a beacon of hope in the gathering gloom. Now, I wasn't so sure I was better off here than out in the woods. I turned back to the wall of photos, my curiosity warring with my growing unease. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the bottom corner of the collage was a photo that looked newer than the rest. The subject was a man in his early 30s, with shaggy brown hair and a scruffy beard. It was me. The photo showed me asleep in my tent, taken just last night when I'd camped at the trailhead before starting my hike this morning. I staggered back, my mind reeling. How was this possible? Who could have taken this picture? A crick from outside snapped me back to the present. It sounded like a footstep on the cabin's rickety porch. I held my breath, straining my ears. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, unmistakably, another creak. Someone was out there. I quickly switched off my flashlight, plunging the cabin into darkness. My eyes struggled to adjust as I pressed myself against the wall next to the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate. They stopped just outside the door. I could hear breathing now, slightly labored, as if whoever it was had been walking for a long time. A beam of light cut through the darkness as a flashlight swept across the cabin's interior. I held perfectly still, barely daring to breathe as the light passed inches from my face. "I know you're in here," a voice called out, low and gravelly. "I saw your light from across the valley. Been watching you stumble around these woods all day." My mind raced. All day. Had this person been following me since I started my hike this morning? "Why don't you come on out?" the voice continued. "It's cold out here, and I've got a fire going back at my place. We could have ourselves a nice chat." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay hidden, to not reveal myself to this stranger. But a small, rational part of my brain whispered that this might be my only chance at survival. I was lost, with no food and no way to call for help. If I stayed here, I'd likely freeze when the temperature dropped overnight. Before I could decide what to do, the choice was made for me. A board beneath my foot gave way with a loud crack. The flashlight beam immediately swung in my direction, pinning me against the wall like a butterfly in a display case. "There you are," the voice said, a note of amusement coloring the words. "No need to be shy. Come on out where I can see you proper." Realizing I had no choice, I slowly stepped into view, squinting against the bright light. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse from hours of disuse. "What do you want?" The flashlight lowered slightly, revealing the silhouette of a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a heavy canvas jacket and a wide-brimmed hat. "Name's Jeb," he said. "I'm just a simple man who lives in these woods. And right now, what I want is to get you someplace warm before you freeze to death." I hesitated, glancing back at the wall of photos. Did you take those pictures?" Jeb chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, you noticed my little collection, did you? Don't worry yourself about that. Just a hobby of mine. A hobby." The casual way he said it made my skin crawl. I looked past him, into the darkness beyond the cabin. Could I make a run for it? But where would I go? I was hopelessly lost, and Jeb clearly knew these woods far better than I did. As if reading my thoughts, Jeb said, "Now, don't go getting any ideas about running off. It's a long way to anywhere from here, and these woods can be mighty dangerous at night. All sorts of things that'd be happy to make a meal of a lost hiker." The threat in his words was clear, even if his tone remained friendly. I swallowed hard, weighing my options. Stay here in this creepy cabin, try to make a run for it in the dark, or go with this stranger who had apparently been stalking me all day. Before I could decide, a sound in the distance made us both freeze. It was a low rumble, growing steadily louder. Jeb cursed under his breath, turning to look out into the night. "Is that a car?" I asked, hope flaring in my chest. Damn Forest Service, Jeb muttered. Must be doing a late patrol. He turned back to me, his voice urgent now. Listen, you've got a choice to make. You can take your chances with them, maybe get a ride back to civilization. Or you can come with me, learn the truth about what's really going on in these woods. The rumble of the engine was getting closer. I could see headlights in the distance now, cutting through the trees. It was the first sign of other people I'd seen all day, a lifeline back to the world I knew. But something in Jeb's words gave me pause. The truth about what's going on in these woods. What did he mean by that? What truth? I asked, curiosity warring with my desire to escape. Jeb grinned, his teeth glinting in the dim light. Let's just say, there's a reason people go missing in these parts. A reason that goes way beyond what you think you know about the world. The headlights were closer now, bouncing over the uneven forest road. I had only seconds to decide. Last chance, Jeb said. You coming with me, or taking your chances with them? I looked at Jeb, then back at the approaching vehicle. My heart raced as I made my decision. I'm sorry, I said, backing away from him. I can't. Disappointment flashed across Jeb's face, quickly replaced by cold anger. Your loss, he growled. But don't say I didn't warn you. With that, he turned and melted into the darkness of the forest. Disappearing so quickly and silently, it was as if he'd never been there at all. Moments later, the Forest Service truck pulled up in front of the cabin. A ranger stepped out, shining her flashlight at me. Are you all right, sir? She called out. We've got reports of a hiker gone missing in this area. Relief washed over me as I stumbled towards her. Yes, I said, my voice cracking. Yes, I'm the missing hiker. I got lost in... and I trailed off, looking back at the cabin. Should I tell her about Jeb, about the photos? Would she even believe me? The ranger followed my gaze, frowning. That old place, it's been abandoned for years. Come on, let's get you back to the station. You looked like you could use a hot meal and a warm bed, as she led me to the truck. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned for one last look at the cabin, half expecting to see Jeb standing there. But there was only darkness. As we drove away, the ranger's radio crackled to life. Be advised, a voice said. We've got another missing person report. Hiker last seen 2 days ago near Black Rock Ridge. The ranger sighed, shaking her head. Third one this month, she muttered. I sank lower in my seat, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with the cold. As the cabin disappeared from view, I couldn't help but wonder, what if I had gone with Jeb? What truth was hidden in these woods? And more importantly, would the hiker they were looking for ever be found? Story 3. The man in the parked car hadn't moved for hours, and now he was walking towards the diner. I wiped down the counter for the 100th time that night, my eyes constantly darting to the grimy window. The neon open 24 HRS sign cast an eerie red glow across the nearly empty parking lot, illuminating. A single car that had been sitting there since my shift started at 10 p.m. It was now approaching 3 a.m. The diner was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of dishes as I restlessly rearranged them. Being the only person working the graveyard shift at Joe's Diner wasn't usually a problem. Most nights, I'd get a few truckers stopping for coffee, maybe some college kids looking for a greasy meal after a night out. But tonight had been dead quiet, and that car had been my only company for hours. I'd tried to get a good look at the driver when I first noticed the car, but the windows were tinted, and the angle was all wrong. As the hours ticked by, I found myself creating stories about who might be inside. A private investigator on a stakeout, a jilted lover waiting for their cheating partner, or maybe just someone who'd fallen asleep at the wheel and decided to sleep it off. But now, as I watched a figure slowly emerge from the car, those harmless scenarios evaporated like mist in the morning sun. The person, a man, I could see now, moved with a deliberate slowness that sent chills down my spine. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark coat that seemed to absorb what little light there was in the parking lot. My heart began to race as he approached the diner. I glanced around frantically, suddenly aware of how alone and vulnerable I was. The diner's owner, Joe, was notoriously cheap. No security cameras, no silent alarm, not even a baseball bat behind the counter for protection. Just me, a 22-year-old college student trying to make ends meet, alone in a diner in the middle of the night. The bell above the door jingled, making me jump despite having watched the man's approach. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his face hidden in the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. Then, slowly, he stepped inside. "Sken, I help you." I managed to stammer out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. The man tilted his head slightly, regarding me from beneath the brim of his hat. "Coffee," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Black." I nodded, relieved to have a task to focus on. As I turned to pour the coffee, I heard him settle onto one of the stools at the counter. The leather of his coat creaked as he moved. "Here you go," I said, placing the mug in front of him. "Anything else?" He didn't respond, didn't even reach for the coffee. He just sat there, still as a statue. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them clearly. "So," I said, desperate to break the silence, "you've been out there a while. Everything okay?" He shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of pale skin and dark, sunken eyes. "Just waiting," he said. "Waiting for what?" The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. A slow smile spread across his face, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too white. "For you to lock up." My blood ran cold. I took an involuntary step back, bumping into the dish rack behind me. A plate clattered to the floor, shattering in the silence. "Dubby, what do you mean?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. He leaned forward, pushing the untouched coffee aside. "I've been watching this place for weeks," he said, his voice almost conversational, waiting for the right moment. "And here you are, all alone on the night shift." "Perfect." My eyes darted to the door. Could I make it? But even as I considered it, I realized he was between me and the only exit. My hand fumbled behind me, searching for something, anything I could use as a weapon. "Don't bother," the man said, as if reading my thoughts. "There's nowhere for you to go. Why don't you come out from behind that counter so we can talk properly?" "I think you should leave," I said, trying to sound firm despite the tremor in my voice. "We're closing early tonight." He chuckled, a sound that raised goosebumps on my arms. "Oh, I don't think so. In fact, I think you're going to come with me when I leave. We have so much to discuss." Panic surged through me. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of thing you read about in the news, not something that happened in real life. Not to me. "My boss will be here any minute," I lied, praying he couldn't see through my bluff. "He always checks in during the night shift." The man's smile widened. "No, he doesn't," he said softly. "Joe hasn't done a night check in years. Not since that heart scare last spring. You've been all alone out here, night after night. Didn't you ever wonder why?" Why he'd leave a young girl all alone, so vulnerable. My breath caught in my throat. How did he know all this? Had he really been watching for weeks? "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stood up slowly, his movements fluid and predatory. "I told you, I want you to come with me. I have so many questions for you, about your hopes, your dreams, about that life you think you're going to have." As he spoke, he began to move around the counter. I backed away, my hip bumping against the grill. The heat seeped through my uniform, grounding me in the moment. "Stay back," I warned, grabbing a spatula from the counter. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all I had. He laughed, the sound echoing in the empty diner. "Oh, you are a fighter, aren't you? Good. That will make this so much more interesting." Just as he was about to round the corner of the counter, headlights swept across the window. We both froze, turning to look. A truck was pulling into the parking lot. Relief flooded through me. Someone was here. I wasn't alone anymore. The man's face contorted with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed. Then, with a speed that seemed impossible, he turned and bolted for the door. I watched in stunned silence as he ran to his car, tires squealing as he peeled out of the parking lot. The truck that had inadvertently saved me pulled up to the spot the man's car had just vacated. A moment later, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Frank, one of our regular truck drivers. "Hey there, Sarah," he called out as he entered. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him what had happened, but no words came out. Instead, to my horror and embarrassment, I burst into tears. Frank's jovial expression immediately turned to concern. He hurried over, his weathered face creased with worry. Hey, what's wrong?" Did something happen? Through my sobs, I managed to tell him about the man, about how he'd been waiting for hours and the things he'd said. Frank listened intently, his frown deepening with each detail. "Jesus," he muttered when I'd finished. "We need to call the cops." As Frank pulled out his phone to dial 911. I sank onto a stool, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police came, took my statement, dusted for fingerprints. They promised to increase patrols in the area and urged me to be vigilant. Joe showed up, full of apologies and promises to install security cameras and an alarm system. But even as the sun began to rise, chasing away the shadows of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The man's parting words echoed in my mind. This isn't over. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that he would be back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but someday. And next time, there might not be a Frank to scare him away. As I finally left the diner, escorted to my car by a kind police officer, I made a decision. I couldn't live in fear, waiting for the man to return. I had to take control, to protect myself. Tomorrow, I'd start looking for a new job. Something during the day, surrounded by people. I'd sign up for self-defense classes, maybe even look into getting a concealed carry permit. Because the next time I saw that man, and I was sure there would be a next time, I wouldn't be the helpless girl behind the counter. I'd be ready. But for now, as I drove home in the early morning light, I couldn't help but glance constantly in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a dark car following me. The man's words played on a loop in my mind. This isn't over. And deep down, I knew he was right. This was just the beginning. Story 4. The tools in his back seat were covered in what looked like dried blood, and we were veering off the main road. I gripped the edge of my seat, my knuckles turning white as Dave, at least, that's what he'd said his name was, turned onto a narrow dirt road. The headlights of his beat-up pickup truck cut through the darkness, illuminating dense forest on either side. This was not the way to town. "Hey, I think we might have taken a wrong turn," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The gas station can't be this far out, right?" Dave glanced at me, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, don't you worry. I know these roads like the back of my hand. This here's a shortcut." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My mind raced back to how I'd ended up in this situation. It had started as a simple road trip, a chance to clear my head after a messy breakup. But somewhere along the endless stretch of highway cutting through the rural heartland, my car had sputtered and died. There I was, stranded on the side of the road as the sun dipped below the horizon. No cell service and miles from the nearest town. That's when Dave had pulled up, offering help with a friendly smile and a southern drawl. "Looks like you could use a hand," he'd said, leaning out of his truck window. "Hop on in. There's a gas station about 20 miles up the road. We can get you some help there." I'd hesitated, years of warnings about strangers flashing through my mind. But as the darkness deepened and the temperature dropped, I realized I didn't have much choice. So I'd climbed into Dave's truck, grateful for the kindness of a stranger. Now, as we bounced along the rough dirt road, the gratitude had curdled into fear. I couldn't shake the image of what I'd seen in the back seat when I'd first climbed in. A jumble of tools, hammers, saws, and what looked horribly like dried blood. "So," Dave said, breaking the tense silence, "what brings you out to these parts? We don't get many out-of-towners around here." I swallowed hard, debating how much to tell him. "Just taking a road trip. Needed to get away for a while, you know." Dave nodded sagely. "Oh, I know all about needing to get away. That's why I love it out here. No one around for miles. You can do just about anything, and, well, let's just say what happens in the woods stays in the woods." A chill ran down my spine at his words. I tried to remind myself that he was probably just making conversation, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But as the truck lurched deeper into the forest, those rationalizations felt increasingly hollow. "How much further?" I asked, unable to keep the edge of panic from my voice. Dave chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Not much further now. We're almost there." "Almost where?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Dave turned to look at me then, and in the dim light of the dashboard, his eyes seemed to glitter with something that made my blood run cold. "Why, to where I take all my special guests, of course." My heart began to race. I glanced at the door handle, wondering if I could jump out. But at the speed we were going, and in this darkness, I'd likely break my neck. If I was lucky. "Listen," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. "I really appreciate your help, but I think I'd rather just walk back to the main road. If you could just let me out here now." "Now," Dave interrupted, his voice taking on a harder edge. "That wouldn't be very hospitable of me, would it? I insist you come see my place. I've got it all set up special." As he spoke, the truck rounded a bend, and suddenly, a small cabin came into view. It sat in a clearing, dark and foreboding against the night sky. My stomach dropped as Dave pulled up in front of it and cut the engine. For a moment, we sat in silence, the sudden quiet pressing in on my ears. Then Dave turned to me, that unsettling smile still on his face. "Well, here we are." Home sweet home. I knew I had to act fast. As Dave reached for his door handle, I made my move. I yanked on my own door, ready to bolt into the woods. But nothing happened. The door wouldn't budge. "Child locks," Dave said, his voice filled with mock sympathy. "Can't be too careful these days, you know." Panic surged through me. I turned to the window, ready to smash it with my elbow, if I had to. But before I could move, I felt something press against my neck. I froze, recognizing the cold kiss of metal against my skin. "Now, let's not do anything foolish," Dave said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're going to come inside, nice and quiet-like? Understand?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Dave opened his door and came around to my side of the truck. As he opened my door, I caught another glimpse of the tools in the back seat. In the harsh glare of the dome light, there was no mistaking the dark stains for anything but blood. Dave grabbed my arm, his grip like iron, and pulled me towards the cabin. My mind raced, searching desperately for a way out. But with the knife at my back and nothing but dark woods surrounding us, I knew my chances were slim. The interior of the cabin was Spartan. A table, a couple of chairs, and a door that I assumed led to another room. But what caught my eye and made my blood run cold was the array of photos tacked to one wall. Each showed a different person, men and women of various ages, all with looks of terror on their faces. "Like my collection?" Dave asked, following my gaze. "You'll be up there soon enough. But first, we're going to have some fun." As he spoke, he moved towards the other door. For a split second, his attention was divided, the knife no longer pressed against me. I knew this might be my only chance. With every ounce of strength I had, I shoved Dave as hard as I could. He stumbled, caught off guard, and I bolted for the still-open front door. I heard him curse behind me, followed by the sound of pursuing footsteps. I ran blindly into the woods, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear Dave crashing through the underbrush behind me, his enraged shouts echoing through the trees. I had no idea where I was going, no plan beyond getting as far away from that cabin as possible. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror drove me onward. I knew that if Dave caught me, I would end up as just another photo on his wall. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rocks and branches tearing at my skin. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and disoriented. As I struggled to my feet, I realized I couldn't hear Dave anymore. Had I lost him? Or was he simply waiting, watching from the darkness? I looked around, trying to get my bearings. In the distance, I saw a faint glow. Lights, a road, maybe, or a house. Hope surged through me. If I could just make it there. I set off towards the lights, moving as quickly and quietly as I could. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me flinch, certain that Dave was right behind me. But I pressed on, the promise of safety driving me forward. As I got closer, I realized the lights were coming from a gas station, the very one Dave had originally promised to take me to. I could see the glow of the fluorescent lights, the silhouettes of gas pumps. I was so focused on my goal that I didn't notice the roots sticking up from the ground until it was too late. I fell hard, crying out as pain shot through my ankle. I tried to stand, but my leg buckled beneath me. Panic rose in my throat as I realized I couldn't run anymore. "Found you," Dave's voice said from behind me. I turned, my heart sinking as I saw him emerge from the shadows. He was holding his knife, the blade glinting in the faint light from the gas station. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. Please don't hurt me. Dave crouched down beside me, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. I flinched away from his touch. She, he said, his voice almost gentle. Don't worry. It'll all be over soon. And you'll have a special place on my wall. I closed my eyes, waiting for the bite of the knife. But instead, I heard a new sound. Car tires on gravel, growing louder. My eyes snapped open. A car was pulling into the gas station, its headlights sweeping across the trees where we were hidden. Dave cursed, looking between me and the approaching vehicle. In that moment of distraction, I acted. I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it in his face. He reeled back, temporarily blinded, and I seized my chance. Ignoring the pain in my ankle, I half-run, half-crawled towards the gas station, screaming for help. The last thing I remember is the bright glare of headlights, the sound of car doors slamming, and voices shouting. Then, mercifully, darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by concerned faces. The police had questions, of course. So many questions. But all I could think about were those photos on Dave's wall. How many people had he taken? How long had he been doing this? They found the cabin, guided by my delirious directions. They found the photos, the tools, the evidence of so many lives cut short. But Dave was gone, vanished into the vast wilderness. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about him out there somewhere. Still driving those lonely roads, still offering help to stranded motorists. And I wonder who will be the next face on his wall. I know one thing for certain. I'll never accept a ride from a stranger again. No matter how dark the night, no matter how long the walk, I'll take my chances on my own 2 feet. Because the scariest monsters aren't the ones lurking in the shadows. They're the ones that offer you a helping hand right before they strike. Story 5. The footsteps in the attic shouldn't exist. I'd sealed off the access years ago. I lay frozen in my bed, ears straining in the darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Then I heard it again, a slow, deliberate creaking of floorboards directly above my head. My heart began to race. I'd moved into this old Victorian house 5 years ago, drawn by its charm and history. But it wasn't until after I'd signed the papers that I discovered the quirks and issues that came with a century-old home. The attic had been one of them. A cramped, dusty space filled with ancient insulation and the lingering smell of mold. After one look, I'd decided it wasn't worth the trouble and had the access securely sealed off. So how was someone up there now? I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my hand trembling slightly. The bright screen momentarily blinded me as I pulled up the app for my security cameras. I'd installed them a few months ago after a rash of break-ins in the neighborhood. The feed from the front door showed an empty porch. The back door, clear. Living room, kitchen, all empty. Another creak from above, louder this time. It sounded like whoever was up there was moving towards the far end of the attic, directly over my home office. My office, where I kept my safe, where I kept the necklace. A chill ran down my spine as I thought of the delicate gold chain and sapphire pendant tucked away in that safe. It had been my grandmother's, passed down through generations, and worth a small fortune. I'd always been paranoid about keeping it safe, hence the top-of-the-line safe, hidden behind a forced panel in my desk. But how could anyone know about it? I'd never told anyone, not even my closest friends. The creaking stopped, replaced by a soft, scratching sound. My imagination conjured images of someone trying to cut through the ceiling, and I had to stifle a panicked laugh. This was insane. There had to be a rational explanation. Gathering my courage, I slipped out of bed, wincing as my bare feet touched the cold hardwood floor. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept leaning against the wall, a precaution that had always seemed a bit silly until now, and crept towards the bedroom door. The hallway was dark and silent. I paused, listening intently, but heard nothing from above. Had I imagined it all? Was this some sort of waking nightmare? Just as I was about to turn back to my room, movement caught my eye. A shadow, barely perceptible, sliding across the far wall of the living room. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was in the house. I gripped the bat tighter, my palms slick with sweat. Should I confront them? Call the police? Try to sneak out? Before I could decide, a floorboard creaked beneath my feet. The shadow in the living room froze. For a long moment, we both stood perfectly still, like players in some twisted game of statues. Then, slowly, the shadow began to move. Towards me. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran back to my bedroom, slamming the door shut and fumbling with the lock. My hand shook so badly I could barely manage it. "I've called the police," I shouted, trying to make my voice sound stronger than I felt. "They'll be here any minute." Silence from the other side of the door. Had they bought my bluff? I reached for my phone, ready to make my lie a reality, when a voice spoke. Low, calm, and terrifyingly close. "No, you haven't." I stumbled back from the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "How did they know? Who are you?" I managed to stammer out. "What do you want?" A soft chuckle from the other side of the door sent chills down my spine. "I think you know what I want, Sarah. The necklace. Your grandmother's necklace." My blood ran cold. They knew my name. They knew about the necklace. This wasn't some random break-in. This was targeted. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, my voice shaking. "Oh, I think you do," the voice replied. "I've been watching you for weeks, Sarah. I know all about you. I know you live alone. I know you work from home most days. I know you keep that precious heirloom locked up in a safe in your office." My mind reeled. Weeks. They'd been watching me for weeks. I thought back to all the times I'd felt uneasy, like I was being watched. The occasional strange noise in the night that I'd dismissed as the house settling. The times I could have sworn I'd left something in one place only to find it slightly moved. "How?" I whispered, more to myself than to the intruder. "You should really be more careful about locking your doors, Sarah," the voice said, a note of amusement coloring their words. "It's amazing what you can learn about a person when you have access to their home." The implication of their words hit me like a physical blow. They'd been in my house before. While I was sleeping, while I was out. How many times had they invaded my space, rifled through my belongings, watched me in my most private moments? A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled to the ensuite bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before I threw up. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, trying to catch my breath, I heard the bedroom door handle jiggle. The lock held, but for how long? I needed to get out, now. I flushed the toilet and turned on the faucet, hoping the noise would cover my movements. Then, as quietly as I could, I made my way to the bedroom window. It overlooked the backyard, a drop of about 15 feet to the ground. Not ideal, but better than the alternative. Just as I was about to open the window, I heard a sharp crack from the bedroom door. They were trying to break it down. No time for caution. I threw open the window and climbed out onto the narrow ledge. The cool night air hit me, making me acutely aware that I was wearing nothing but a thin nightgown. But modesty was the least of my concerns right now. Another loud crack from inside, followed by the splintering of wood. The door wouldn't hold much longer. I took a deep breath and jumped. The impact knocked the wind out of me, pain shooting through my ankles and knees. But adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring where, just needing to put distance between myself and the house. I made it to the street before I realized I had no plan, no phone, no shoes, no idea where to go. I looked back at the house, half expecting to see the intruder pursuing me. But the house stood dark and silent, betraying no hint of the terror inside. A car turned onto the street, its headlights momentarily blinding me. I waved my arms frantically, desperate for help. The car slowed to a stop beside me. An elderly couple peered out, their faces a mixture of concern and confusion. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. Someone broke into my house. They're after me. Please, can you take me to the police station?" The couple exchanged a glance, clearly debating the wisdom of letting a half-dressed, wild-eyed stranger into their car. But something in my face must have convinced them of my sincerity. "Get in," the man said, unlocking the back door. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at my house. Was the intruder still inside, searching for the necklace? Or were they watching me even now, planning their next move? At the police station, my story was met with a mix of sympathy and skepticism. They took my statement and sent officers to check out the house, but found no sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. The attic was still sealed off, undisturbed. "Are you sure you didn't imagine it?" one officer asked gently. Stress can do funny things to a person's mind, but I knew what I'd heard, what I'd seen. The shadow in the living room, the voice on the other side of my bedroom door. It had been real. In the days that followed, I stayed with friends, too terrified to return to my house. I had the locks changed, installed more security cameras, even hired a private security firm to sweep the place for hidden cameras or listening devices. They found nothing. Slowly, reluctantly, I began to wonder if maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe the stress of work, of living alone in that big old house, had finally gotten to me. Maybe I needed help. But then, about a week after that terrifying night, I received a package. No return address, just my name printed in neat block letters. Inside was a single gold earring, a perfect match for the ones that went with my grandmother's necklace. Attached was a note: "I'll be seeing you again soon. Sarah. Sweet dreams." I moved out that day, leaving everything behind. The house, my belongings, the necklace. None of it was worth my peace of mind, my safety. But even now, months later, living in a new city under a new name, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. That somewhere out there, someone is biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. And every night, as I lie awake listening for footsteps that shouldn't exist, I wonder, will tonight be the night they find me? Story 6. The townspeople's smiles never reached their eyes, and now our car wouldn't start. I slouched in the passenger seat, watching Jake fiddle with the ignition for the umpteenth time. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then fell silent. Again, damn it. Jake slammed his palm against the steering wheel. The sound echoed through the empty street, bouncing off the weathered storefronts that lined the town's main drag. I glanced out the window, an uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It would have been beautiful if not for the growing knot of dread in my stomach. We'd pulled into Millbrook just as our gas gauge hit empty, a stroke of luck we'd initially celebrated. The town wasn't on our map or GPS. We'd only spotted it after taking the scenic detour off the highway. A quaint little place to stretch our legs and refuel before continuing our road trip. Or so we thought. Maybe we should ask for help, I suggested, eyeing the group of locals gathered on the porch of what passed for the town's general store. They'd been watching us since we'd arrived, their gazes never wavering. Jake followed my gaze and frowned. I don't know, Leah. Something about this place feels off. I couldn't argue with that. From the moment we'd driven into Millbrook, things had felt wrong. The streets were too clean, the buildings too perfectly maintained for a town this small and isolated, and the people, their smiles were too wide, their greetings too enthusiastic. But what choice did we have? We were stranded. Come on, I said, pushing open my door. Let's at least ask if there's a mechanic in town. As we approached the general store, the group on the porch fell silent. Their eyes followed our every move, those unsettling smiles never faltering. Evening, folks. The older man greeted us, his voice syrupy sweet. Having some car trouble. Jake nodded, shifting uncomfortably beside me. Yeah, it won't start. Is there a mechanic around who could take a look? The man's smile widened, if that was even possible. Well now, that is a shame. Afraid our mechanic, old Bill, he's out of town for a spell. But don't you worry none. Why don't you two come inside and have a bite to eat? I'm sure we can sort something out. I glanced at Jake, seeing my own hesitation mirrored in his eyes. But before we could respond, we were being ushered into the store by the smiling crowd. The interior was like stepping back in time. Ancient shelving units lined the walls, stocked with dusty cans and boxes. A small diner area occupied one corner, complete with a creme-edged counter and red vinyl stools. Sit, the older man insisted, guiding us to a booth. Mabel fix you up with some of her famous meatloaf. Best in the county. As if on cue, a plump woman in a floral apron appeared, setting down 2 plates piled high with food. The speed with which it arrived was unsettling, almost as if they'd been expecting us. Eat up, dears, Mabel cooed. You looked like you could use a good meal. I stared down at the meatloaf, my appetite vanishing. Something about the color seemed off. But with every eye in the place on us, I felt compelled to at least pretend to eat. As Jake and I pushed the food around our plates, the locals peppered us with questions. Where were we from? Where were we headed? Did we have family expecting us? With each answer, their smiles grew wider, their eyes gleaming with an intensity that made my skin crawl. You know, the older man who'd introduced himself as Sheriff Hawkins said casually, we don't get many visitors here in Millbrook. Folks tend to pass us by, but those who do stop. Well, they often find they like it here so much, they decide to stay. A chill ran down my spine at his words. I caught Jake's eye, seeing my own alarm reflected there. That's nice, Jake said carefully. But we really should be going. If we could just use a phone to call for a tow. Oh, no need for that, Sheriff Hawkins interrupted, his smile never wavering. I'm sure we can get your car fixed up right quick. Why, I bet if we all pitched in, we could have you on your way by morning. The way he said by morning made it clear that leaving tonight wasn't an option. That's very kind, I said, forcing a smile of my own, but we wouldn't want to impose. "If you could just point us towards the nearest hotel." "Nonsense," Mabel exclaimed. "We've got plenty of room at the boarding house. It'll be no trouble at all." Before we knew it, we were being whisked out of the diner and down the street. The sun had set completely now, leaving the town bathed in the sickly glow of flickering streetlights. As we walked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were no cars on the streets. Not a single one, aside from our own useless vehicle. The boarding house was a Victorian monstrosity, all gingerbread trim and peeling paint. As we climbed the creaking steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mothballs and decay. Mabel led us up a narrow staircase to a small, musty room with twin beds. "You'd have get some rest now," she said, that unnervingly wide smile still in place. "We'll have your car sorted by morning, don't you worry." As soon as the door closed behind her, Jake and I turned to each other. "We need to get out of here," he whispered urgently. I nodded, my heart racing. "Did you see? There are no other cars in this town." And the way they kept asking about our families, if anyone was expecting us. "I know. It's like they're making sure no one will miss us." Jake ran a hand through his hair, his eyes wild. "What the hell have we stumbled into, liar?" I shook my head, fighting back panic. "I don't know, but we can't stay to find out. We need to leave." Now, we waited an hour, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house settling. When all seemed quiet, we crept down the stairs, wincing at every squeak of the floorboards. The front door was locked. Of course it was. "Window," Jake mouthed, pointing to the parlor. We made our way there, our nerves stretched to the breaking point. Just as Jake was about to lift the sash, a floorboard creaked behind us. We whirled around to find Sheriff Hawkins standing in the doorway, that eerie smile still plastered on his face. Now, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Where do you two think you're going at this hour? It's not safe to be wandering around in the dark." "We're leaving," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Thank you for your hospitality, but we'll be on our way now." The sheriff's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that. You see, Millbrook has a way of keeping those who visit. We need new blood, you understand, to keep the town alive." As he spoke, more figures appeared behind him. The smiling faces of the townspeople we'd met earlier, now twisted into something hungry and inhuman. Jake grabbed my hand. "Run." We bolted for the window, no longer caring about stealth. Jake smashed the glass with his elbow, ignoring the cuts as he helped me scramble through. We hit the ground running, the enraged shouts of the townspeople echoing behind us. We ran blindly through the dark streets, the layout of the town suddenly unfamiliar and maze-like. Every turn seemed to lead us back to the center of town, as if the very geography was working against us. "There," Jake gasped, pointing. Our car sat where we'd left it, a beacon of hope in the nightmare we'd found ourselves in. We reached it just as the mob rounded the corner, their inhuman shrieks filling the air. Jake yanked on the door handle, but it was locked. No, I moaned, pulling frantically at my own door. This couldn't be happening. We couldn't have come so far, only to be trapped now. Suddenly, Jake's door popped open. He dove inside, reaching across to unlock my door. I tumbled in just as the first of the townspeople reached the car, their hands clawing at the windows. Come on, Jake muttered, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice. and roared to life. We peeled out of there, tires squealing on the pavement. In the rearview mirror, I could see the townspeople shrinking into the distance, their mouths open in silent screams. We drove for hours, not daring to stop until the sun began to peak over the horizon. Only then, at a busy truck stop far from Millbrook, did we finally pull over. Jake and I sat in silence for a long moment, the events of the night settling over us like a heavy blanket. Finally, I spoke. Do you think anyone would believe us if we told them? Jake shook his head slowly. I'm not sure I believe it myself. If we hadn't both been there. I nodded, understanding. Who would believe a story about a town full of smiling monsters, trapping unwary travelers? It sounded like something out of a bad horror movie. As we pulled back onto the highway, continuing our journey, I couldn't help but think about Millbrook. Was it still there, waiting for its next victims? Or had it vanished like a mirage, only to reappear somewhere else, someday? One thing was certain, we'd be sticking to the main roads from now on. No more scenic detours, because you never know what might be waiting in those hidden corners of the map, behind those 2 wide smiles and 2 friendly greetings. Sometimes, the real monsters are the ones that look just like us. Story 7. The screams from the storage unit weren't human, at least, not entirely. I froze in the middle of my rounds, the beam of my flashlight wavering as I strained my ears. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the pounding of my own heart. Then it came again, a high, keening wail that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was coming from Unit 237. I'd been working the night shift at Sekarastor's storage facility for 3 months now, and it wasn't a bad gig, all things considered. The pay was decent, the work was easy, and most nights I had the place to myself. Just me, row after row of identical metal doors, and whatever people had decided was worth paying to keep out of sight. But lately, things had been off. It started small. Noises I couldn't quite place. Scratching sounds from behind locked doors. The feeling of being watched when I knew I was alone. I'd tried to brush it off as nerves, the product of too many late nights and too much caffeine. But then there was Unit 237. About a month ago, a new client had rented it out. I never saw them. They'd done everything online and paid for a full year up front. The day after they rented it, a large truck had shown up. 3 men in hazmat suits had unloaded a single, massive crate. They'd been in and out in less than 10 minutes. Since then, strange things had been happening around Unit 237. The temperature in that section of the building would drop suddenly, leaving patches of frost on the concrete floor. Sometimes, I'd catch a whiff of something rotting as I passed by. And now, apparently, there were screams. I approached the unit cautiously, my flashlight beam dancing across the metal door. The padlock was still in place, looking exactly as it had earlier in my shift. But as I got closer, I could hear something else beneath the screams. A wet, squelching sound that turned my stomach. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. What was I expecting? For someone to answer from inside a locked storage unit? The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. Then, a new sound. Something heavy dragging across the concrete floor inside the unit. It was moving towards the door. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. This was insane. There couldn't be anything alive in there. The unit had been locked for a month. Nothing could survive that long without food or water. Right. I fumbled for the radio clipped to my belt, my fingers numb with fear. I needed to call this in, get someone else out here. This was way above my pay grade. Just as I was about to hit the call button, a voice crackled through the static. "Everything all right out there, Mike?" I nearly dropped the radio in surprise. It was Mr. Hendricks, the owner of Sekira store. What was he doing here at this hour? Not sure, sir," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I heard some strange noises coming from Unit 237. I think we might have an intruder." There was a long pause. When Mr. Hendricks spoke again, his voice was tight with what sounded like barely contained anger. "Unit 237, are you certain?" "Yes, sir." "I heard screams and do not approach that unit, Mr. Hendricks cut me off. "Do you understand? Under no circumstances are you to open that door or attempt to investigate further. I'm on my way. Wait for me in the office." The radio went dead. I stood there for a moment, staring at it in disbelief. What the hell was going on? A loud thud from inside Unit 237 made me jump. It sounded like something had just slammed against the door. The metal bulged outward slightly, as if struck by tremendous force. That was enough for me. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the safety of the office. I slammed the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Through the window, I could see the long corridor leading to Unit 237. It was quiet now, no sign of whatever had made those terrible sounds. But the silence felt charged, expectant, like the calm before a storm. Mr. Hendricks arrived 10 minutes later, bursting through the office door with a wild look in his eyes. He was disheveled, his usually immaculate suit rumpled as if he'd slept in it. "Tell me exactly what happened," he demanded without preamble. I recounted everything I'd heard and seen, watching as Mr. Hendricks' face grew paler with each word. By the time I finished, he looked like he might be sick. "Sir," I ventured, "what's in that unit?" Mr. Hendricks ran a shaking hand through his thinning hair. "Something that should have stayed buried," he muttered, almost to himself. Then, louder, "Mike, I need you to go home now. Forget everything you saw or heard tonight. It's better for everyone if you just forget." I stared at him in disbelief. "Forget, Mr. Hendricks," I heard screams. "Something in there is alive, and it sounds like it's in pain. We need to call the police, or animal control, or no." Mr. Hendricks shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. "No police. No one can know about this. Do you understand? If you breathe a word of this to anyone, you'll regret it." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. I took an involuntary step back, my mind reeling. What had I stumbled into? Just then, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then we were plunged into darkness. The emergency generators kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. And that's when we heard it. A loud, metallic screech echoing down the corridor. The sound of tearing metal. Mr. Hendricks went white as a sheet. "Oh God," he whispered. "It's free." Before I could ask what he meant, something appeared at the far end of the corridor. In the red emergency lighting, I couldn't make out details, but what I saw was enough to turn my blood to ice. It was huge, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, its body a twisted mass of writhing tentacles and glistening scales. As it moved towards us, I caught glimpses of too many eyes, of razor-sharp claws, of a maw filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth. Mr. Hendricks let out a strangled cry and bolted for the door. I was right behind him, terror lending speed to my feet. We raced through the storage facility, the sound of our pursuer echoing off the metal doors. Its screams, those terrible, not quite human screams, filled the air, driving spikes of fear into my brain. We burst out into the parking lot, gasping for air. Mr. Hendricks fumbled with his car keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. "Get in!" he yelled, already sliding behind the wheel. I didn't need to be told twice. I dove into the passenger seat just as Mr. Hendricks gunned the engine. We peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing on the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of the thing from Unit 237. It stood in the doorway of the storage facility, its mass barely contained by the frame. As we sped away, it let out one final, earth-shattering scream. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, putting as much distance between us and Sakura Store as possible. Finally, when the adrenaline began to wear off and the reality of what we'd seen started to sink in, I turned to Mr. Henris. "What was that thing?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Mr. Henris kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Something that should never have been brought back," he said quietly. "A relic from a time before history, awakened by people who didn't understand what they were dealing with. But why was it in our storage facility?" He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Because they needed somewhere to keep it while they figured out how to control it. Somewhere off the grid, where no one would ask questions." He glanced at me, his eyes haunted. "I should never have agreed to it. The money. It seemed worth it at the time." I slumped back in my seat, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to believe this was all some elaborate hoax or a stress-induced hallucination, but I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. "What do we do now?" I asked. Mr. Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. "We run," he said finally. "We run, and we pray it doesn't find us." As we sped down the empty highway, leaving behind everything we knew, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had been in Unit 237 was loose now, free to wreak havoc on an unsuspecting world. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could still hear those screams. Not quite human, but not entirely inhuman either. A sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. The night shift at Sakura Store was over, but the real nightmare, that was just beginning. Story 8. The VHS tape showed me sleeping. Footage taken just last night in a house that wasn't mine. My hands trembled as I ejected the tape from the ancient VCR, the machine whirring and clicking in protest. I stared at the black plastic rectangle, my name scrawled across the label in unfamiliar handwriting. How was this possible? It had started innocently enough. I'd agreed to house sit for the Johnsons, a lovely older couple from my neighborhood who were taking their first vacation in years. "Just water the plants and check the mail," Mrs. Johnson had said, pressing the house key into my palm with a warm smile. "Oh, and feel free to watch some movies if you get bored. We've got quite the collection." She wasn't kidding. The Johnsons' living room was lined with shelves upon shelves of VHS tapes. It was like stepping into a time capsule from the 90s, out of curiosity. I'd started browsing the titles, marveling at forgotten classics and obscure B-movies. That's when I found it. A tape with no case, just my name written on the label in bold, black marker. Curiosity had gotten the better of me. Now, I wished I'd never hit play. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed me, fast asleep in the Johnsons' guest bedroom. The camera pans slowly across my sleeping form, lingering on my face. Then, a shadow had moved at the edge of the frame. Someone was in the room with me. I'd slammed the stop button, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The shirt I was wearing in the video, I was wearing it now. My hair was mussed in the exact same way it had been when I'd looked in the mirror this morning. This footage was from last night. A creak from upstairs made me jump. I was supposed to be alone in the house. The Johnsons weren't due back for another 3 days. Slowly, I turned towards the staircase, straining my ears. Another creak. Then another. Footsteps moving towards the stairs. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out of here now. I lunged for the front door, only to find it locked. The deadbolt that I distinctly remembered unlocking when I arrived was now firmly in place. I yanked at it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them on the stairs now, slow and deliberate. Whoever or whatever had been in that room with me last night was coming. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. They landed on the window. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy bookend from the shelf and hurled it at the glass. It bounced off harmlessly. No, 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 I muttered, my voice rising in panic. This couldn't be happening. The footsteps had reached the bottom of the stairs. I could see a shadow stretching across the floor, growing larger as its owner approached. In desperation, I dove behind the couch, trying to make myself as small as possible. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I looked down to see an old film camera, the kind that used actual film reels. The shadow was at the edge of the couch now. I held my breath, clutching the camera like a lifeline. A hand appeared, gripping the back of the couch. It was pale, almost translucent, with long, spindly fingers that ended in sharp, blackened nails. I bit back a scream as the hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. Not anymore. As its head began to come into view, I did the only thing I could think of. I raised the camera and hit the record button. The effect was instantaneous. The creature let out an inhuman shriek, recoiling as if burned. It stumbled backward, its form seeming to flicker and distort. I kept the camera trained on it, my finger holding down the record button so hard it hurt. The creature writhed and twisted, its shape blurring until it was nothing more than a dark smudge against the wall. And then, with a sound like tearing fabric, it was gone. I sat there for a long moment, the only sound in the room my own ragged breathing and the soft whir of the camera. Slowly, I lowered it, my arm shaking from the effort of holding it up. What the hell had just happened? The lock on the front door clicked open, making me jump. Sunlight streamed in through the window, the same window that had been impenetrable just moments ago. I staggered to my feet, my mind reeling. I needed to get out of here, to process what had just happened. But as I reached for the door handle, a thought stopped me cold. The tape. I couldn't leave it here. I turned back to the VCR, half expecting the tape to be gone. But there it was, still sitting in the eject slot. I grabbed it, along with the camera, and practically ran out of the house. It wasn't until I was safely in my own apartment, doors locked and curtains drawn, that I allowed myself to really think about what I'd seen. The creature in the Johnsons' house, the tape of me sleeping, the camera that had somehow banished the thing. None of it made sense. And yet, the evidence was right here in my hands. With shaking fingers, I rewound the film and the camera and held it up to the light. What I saw made my blood run cold. The film was blank, completely and utterly blank. But I had seen the creature react to being filmed. I had seen it disappear. How could there be nothing on the film unless... A horrible thought began to form in my mind. I looked at the VHS tape, still clutched in my other hand. My name stared back at me, the handwriting no longer unfamiliar. It was mine. With a growing sense of dread, I realized what must have happened, what was still happening. The creature hadn't disappeared when I filmed it. It had simply moved into the camera, into the film. And now it was waiting for someone else to hit play. I sank to the floor, the weight of understanding crushing down on me. This wasn't over. It would never be over. As long as there were cameras, as long as there was film, that thing would exist, and it would be hungry. A knock at my door made me jump. "Hello?" a voice called out. "Package delivery? For Sarah?" My heart stopped. That was my name, but I hadn't ordered anything. Slowly, I approached the door and peered through the peephole. A delivery man stood outside, holding a small package. "Just leave it," I called out, my voice shaking. "I'm afraid I can't do that," the man replied, his tone oddly flat. "This package requires a signature." Something about his voice sent chills down my spine. I looked closer through the peephole and felt my blood turn to ice. The delivery man's eyes were completely black, like empty voids in his face. And in his hands, the package was moving, pulsing like a beating heart. I stumbled away from the door, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here, to run, to hide. But where could I go? How could I escape something that could travel through film and video? The knocking grew louder, more insistent. "Sarah," the thing outside called, its voice distorting into something inhuman. "Don't you want to see what's on the tape?" I looked around frantically, searching for an escape route. My eyes landed on my laptop, sitting open on the coffee table. The webcam light was on, a steady green glow in the dimness of my apartment. With a sinking feeling, I realized it was too late. It was already here. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of me, right now, cowering in my own living room. A shadow moved at the edge of the frame, growing larger, closer. As the door began to splinter under the force of the creature's blows, as the shadow on my laptop screen loomed ever larger, I had one last, terrifying thought. Who would find the tape of this moment? Who would be the next victim in this endless, nightmarish loop? And then, the shadow engulfed me, and everything went dark. Story 9. The hitchhiker matched the description of the escaped convict, and we'd just passed a police car. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white as I tried to keep my eyes on the rain-slicked road ahead. The rhythmic swish of the wipers did little to calm my frayed nerves. In the passenger seat, the man I'd picked up about an hour ago sat silently, his face half hidden by the shadow of his hood. I'd been driving for hours, making my way across the state for a job interview. The radio had been my only company, droning on about local news and weather reports. That's when I'd heard it. A warning about an escaped convict, armed and dangerous, last seen in this area. The description was vague. Male, mid-30s, medium build. But as I glanced at my silent passenger, a chill ran down my spine. It fit him perfectly. I'd picked him up on a lonely stretch of highway, his thumb outstretched, clothes soaked through from the relentless rain. It was stupid, I knew that. My mother's voice echoed in my head, warning me about the dangers of picking up strangers. But something in his eyes, a look of desperation, of humanity, had made me stop. Now, as the police car's lights faded in my rearview mirror, I was beginning to regret that decision. "Everything okay?" The man's voice, rough from disuse, made me jump. I forced a smile, hoping he couldn't hear the tremor in my voice. "Yeah, fine. Just long drive, you know." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Where'd you say you were headed again?" I hadn't. That detail seemed important now. "Oh, just up to Capital City," I said, trying to sound casual. Job interview, but so. He shifted in his seat, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic at his waist. My heart nearly stopped. Was that a gun? The radio crackled to life, cutting through the tense silence. "We interrupt this broadcast with an update on the escaped convict. Police have set up roadblocks on all major highways leading out of the county. All drivers are advised to be on high alert and report any suspicious individuals." I reached out to change the station, but the man's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. His touch was ice cold. "Leave it," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I swallowed hard, pulling my hand back to the wheel. "Sure, no problem. I like to stay informed about these things anyway." Crazy stuff, huh? An escaped convict. He didn't respond, just turned to stare out the window. The tension in the car was palpable, pressing in on me from all sides. We drove in silence for what felt like hours. The only sounds, the patter of rain on the roof, and the occasional rumble of thunder. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to gauge his mood, to see if he'd noticed my growing suspicion. As we approached a bend in the road, I saw flashing lights ahead. A roadblock. My heart began to race. This was it. If he really was the escaped convict, there was no way he'd let me drive straight into a police checkpoint. I slowed the car, unsure of what to do. Run the blockade, tried to turn around. My palms were sweating, making the steering wheel slippery under my grip. "Pull over," the man said suddenly. I looked at him, startled. "What?" I said. "Pull over." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. With shaking hands, I guided the car to the shoulder of the road, cutting the engine. The sound of the rain seemed deafening in the sudden silence. "Listen," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who you are or what you've done, but shut up," he snapped, reaching into his jacket. This was it. He was going for the gun. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But instead of the cold press of metal against my skin, I heard the rustle of paper. I opened my eyes to see him holding out a worn leather wallet. Inside was a badge. "Detective John Marsden," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm sorry for the deception, but I needed to maintain my cover." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process this new information. "You're a cop," he nodded, tucking the badge away. "Undercover. We've been tracking this escaped convict for days. When I saw you pick me up, I thought you might be working with him. I had to play it cool until I was sure." Relief washed over me, so strong it left me dizzy. I slumped back in my seat, letting out a shaky laugh. "Oh my God," I thought. I was so sure. Detective Marston's lips quirked in a small smile. "You did good, kid. Kept you cool, didn't do anything rash. That's more than I can say for most people in your situation." I nodded, still trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. "So, what now? Do we go to the roadblock?" He shook his head. No, that would blow my cover. I need you to drop me off a little ways up the road. There's a rendezvous point where I can meet up with my team. Okay, I said, starting the car again. I can do that. We drove in silence for a few more miles, the tension from earlier replaced by a strange sort of camaraderie. As we approached a small dirt road branching off from the highway, Detective Marston instructed me to pull over. This is my stop, he said, reaching for the door handle. Thanks for the ride, and again, I'm sorry for scaring you. I waved off his apology. No, it's fine. I'm just glad everything turned out okay. He paused, one foot out the door, and turned back to me with a serious expression. Listen, one last thing. If anyone asks, you never saw me, all right? This operation is highly sensitive. Lives could be at risk if word gets out. I nodded solemnly, of course. I won't say a word. With a final nod of thanks, he disappeared into the rainy night. I sat there for a moment, watching the spot where he'd vanished, still processing everything that had happened. Finally, I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway. The roadblock was just ahead, the flashing lights cutting through the gloomy night. As I approached, a state trooper waved me down. Evening, sir, he said, shining a flashlight into my car. We're looking for an escaped convict. Have you seen anyone suspicious on the road tonight? I shook my head, remembering Detective Marston's warning. No, sir, just me out here. Single quotes. The trooper nodded, seemingly satisfied. All right, well, keep an eye out. This guy's dangerous. And sir, be careful about picking up hitchhikers. You never know who might be out there. I forced a smile. Don't worry, I've learnt my lesson about that. As I drove away from the roadblock, a nagging feeling began to grow in the pit of my stomach. Something about the whole situation felt off. I turned on the radio, hoping for a distraction. And in breaking news, the search continues for Detective John Marston, who went missing 3 days ago while working undercover on the escaped convict case. Authorities fear he may have been captured or killed. In related news, another driver has reported being robbed by a man claiming to be an undercover police officer. Citizens are advised not to pick up hitchhikers and to report any suspicious activity. The words washed over me like ice water. My hands began to shake as the full horror of the situation sank in. I'd been played. The man I'd picked up wasn't Detective John Marston. He wasn't an undercover cop. He was the escaped convict, and I'd just helped him slip past a police roadblock. I pulled over to the side of the road, my breath coming in short gasps. How could I have been so stupid? The badge, the story, it had all seemed so plausible in the moment. But now, looking back, I could see all the holes, all the red flags I'd ignored. As I sat there, the rain pounding on the roof of my car, a new fear began to take hold. The convict knew my face, knew where I was going. What if he came after me to ensure my silence? With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone to call the police. But as the screen lit up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A new text message from an unknown number. Thanks for the ride, kid. See you in Capital City. I stared at the message, my mind reeling. How had he gotten my number? What did he want from me? As I sat there, paralyzed with fear, I realized that my nightmare was far from over. It had only just begun. The highway stretched out before me, dark and foreboding. Somewhere out there, a dangerous man was free, and he had me in his sights. I put the car in drive, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. Because in the game of cat and mouse that had just begun, I was most definitely the mouse and the cat. He was out there, waiting, watching, ready to pounce. Story 10. The note under my door read, "We've been waiting for you," and it was written in my own handwriting. I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, keys still dangling from my fingers, as I stared at the slip of paper at my feet. The hallway behind me was silent, the flickering fluorescent lights casting strange shadows on the worn carpet. I'd only been gone for an hour, picking up some last-minute groceries for my first night in the new place. Who could have left this? And how did they manage to replicate my handwriting so perfectly? With a shaking hand, I picked up the note. The paper was cheap, the kind you'd find in any dollar store notebook. But the handwriting, it was unmistakably mine. The looping G's, the way I crossed my T's slightly to the left, even the slight smudge where the ink hadn't quite dried before I'd folded the paper. It was all exactly as I would have written it. A chill ran down my spine as I looked up and down the empty hallway. Was this some kind of sick joke? A prank by the previous tenants? I stepped into my apartment, quickly shutting and locking the door behind me. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was reassuring, but it did little to calm my racing heart. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Boxes stacked haphazardly in the living room, a single lamp casting a warm glow over the chaos. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd written the note myself and forgotten about it. A welcoming message to myself, perhaps. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. I'd never do something like that. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. It was a text from my best friend, Lily. "Hey, how's the new place? Still up for video chat tonight?" I'd almost forgotten about our planned call. Lily had wanted to get a virtual tour of the apartment. I glanced at the time, 8:45 p.m. We'd agreed on 9 o'clock. "Yeah, still on," I texted back, my fingers trembling slightly. "Talk to you soon." I spent the next 15 minutes trying to unpack a few more boxes, but my mind kept wandering back to the note. By the time my laptop chimed with Lily's incoming call, I'd made almost no progress. "There's my girl." Lily's cheerful face filled the screen. "Show me around this palace of yours." I forced a smile, trying to push my unease aside. It's hardly a palace, but here we go. I carried the laptop around, showing Lily the small kitchen, the bedroom with its view of the city skyline, the bathroom with its vintage tiles. "Oh, Sarah, it's perfect," Lily gushed. "I'm so happy for you. This is such a great fresh start after..." "Well, you know." I nodded, not wanting to dwell on the messy breakup that had prompted this move. "Thanks, Lil. It feels good to have a place that's all mine." As I turned to head back to the living room, something caught my eye. There, on the bathroom mirror, was a note. A note that hadn't been there when I'd shown Lily the bathroom mirror moments ago. "Sarah, you okay?" Lily's voice sounded tinny and far away. I approached the mirror slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The note was written in steam, as if someone had just taken a hot shower, but that was impossible. I'd been the only one in the apartment. "We see you," the message read. The handwriting was mine. Again, "Sarah, what's wrong?" Lily's voice was more insistent now. I turned back to the laptop, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sorry, just thought I saw a spider." False alarm. Ugh, don't scare me like that. You know how I feel about creepy crawlies. We chatted for a few more minutes, but I was distracted, my eyes constantly darting to the bathroom door. When we finally said our goodbyes, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I needed to think, to try and make sense of what was happening. I walked back to the bathroom, half expecting the message to be gone. But it was still there, the words slowly fading as the steam dissipated. "We see you." A loud knock at the front door made me jump. I froze, straining my ears. Who could it be at this hour? The knock came again, more insistent this time. Cautiously, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky breath, relief mingling with confusion. Maybe it was just a neighbor at the wrong door. But then I saw it. Another note slipped under the door while I'd been looking through the peephole. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. "Let us in, Sarah. We've been waiting so long." My handwriting. Again, panic began to set in. This couldn't be happening. It didn't make any sense. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone. The police, Lily, the building manager. But as I unlocked the screen, I saw dozens of notifications. Missed calls, text messages, emails, all from myself. I opened the text messages, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "We're here, Sarah. Let us in. We've always been here. It's time to come home." Message after message, all in a conversation with myself. But I hadn't sent any of them. A movement in the corner of my eye made me look up. There, reflected in the dark window, was a figure, standing right behind me. I whirled around, a scream catching in my throat. But there was no one there. The kitchen was empty. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. As if in response to my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. Another message. "It's very real, Sarah. We're very real." I dropped the phone, watching in horror as it skittered across the floor. As it came to a stop, the screen lit up with another message. "Look in the bedroom, Sarah. We have a surprise for you." Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the apartment and never look back. But a morbid curiosity, a need to understand what was happening, propelled me forward. The bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the gap. With a trembling hand, I pushed it open. The room was exactly as I'd left it, my suitcase still open on the bed, clothes spilling out. But there, on the wall opposite the bed, was something new. Photos. Dozens of them. All of me. Me sleeping in this very bed. Me in the shower. Me eating breakfast at the kitchen counter. Me on the phone with Lily just an hour ago. And in every photo, barely visible in the background, were figures. Shadowy, indistinct, but undeniably there. Watching. Always watching. A note was pinned in the center of this macabre collage. I didn't need to get closer to know what it would say, or whose handwriting it would be in. "Welcome home, Sarah. We've missed you." The sound of the front door opening echoed through the apartment. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving towards the bedroom. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think. This was it. Whatever they were here. The bedroom door swung open fully, revealing a group of figures. As they stepped into the dim light, I felt the last shreds of my sanity begin to slip away. They were me, all of them. Dozens of versions of me, each slightly different. Some older, some younger, some with scars or tattoos I'd never had, but all undeniably me. One of them, a version that looked exactly as I did now, stepped forward. I smiled, but it was a cold thing, devoid of warmth or humanity. "We've been waiting for you, Sarah," she said, her voice a perfect mimicry of my own. "It's time for you to join us, to become us." As they closed in around me, their cold hands reaching out, I realized the truth. I wasn't moving into a new apartment. I was moving into a new reality. A reality where I was both the watcher and the watched. Where every version of me that could have been, would be, or never was, existed simultaneously. And as I felt myself begin to fragment, to multiply, one last thought echoed through my mind. In this new home, I would always be waiting for myself. And I would always be watching. Story 11. The screams echoing through the forest weren't human, but they used to be. I froze in my tracks, my flashlight beam wavering as I strained my ears. For a moment, all I could hear was the rustling of leaves in the night breeze and the pounding of my own heart. Then it came again, a high, keening wail that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 10 years as a park ranger, and I'd never heard anything like it. I'd set out at dusk, following up on a report of an abandoned campsite deep in the woods. It wasn't unusual for inexperienced hikers to bite off more than they could chew, especially in this part of Blackwood National Park. The terrain was rough, the trails poorly marked. Most times, we'd find them huddled around a dying campfire, cold and hungry, but otherwise fine. This felt different. The campsite, when I found it, looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The tent was shredded, its contents strewn across the small clearing. Sleeping bags lay in tatters, and a cooler had been smashed open, its contents picked clean. But it was the trees surrounding the camp that made my blood run cold. Deep gouges marred the trunks, too high up to have been made by any animal I knew. And there, barely visible in the fading light, were smears of what looked horribly like blood. I keyed my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "Base, this is Ranger Thompson. I've found the campsite." No sign of the campers, but I trailed off, unsure how to describe what I was seeing. Static crackled for a moment before a response came through. "Copy that, Thompson. What's your status?" I opened my mouth to reply, but another scream cut through the night, closer this time, much closer. "Thompson, do you copy?" I fumbled with the radio, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. "Yeah, I copy. Listen, something's not right out here. I'm hearing noises. I think we need to assemble a search party, ASAP." "Understood. Can you describe these noises?" How could I describe them? How could I put into words the raw anguish, the inhuman quality of those screams? They sound like people, but wrong somehow. Like they're in pain, but it's more than that. It's my words were cut off by a rustling in the underbrush behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something pale and elongated darting between the trees. Then it was gone. "Thompson, are you there? What's happening?" I realized I was still clutching the radio in a death grip. I saw something. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human. And it wasn't any animal I've ever seen. "Okay, stay calm. We're assembling a team now." "What's your exact location?" I rattled off my coordinates, my eyes never leaving the spot where I'd seen the thing. As I spoke, I became aware of a new sound. A soft, rhythmic clicking, coming from all around me. Bass. I think there's more than one. I can hear them. More than one. What, Thompson? Before I could answer, a blood-curdling shriek split the air. It was the same sound I'd heard earlier, but so close now, it felt like it was inside my head. I dropped the radio, clapping my hands over my ears. When I lowered them, the forest had fallen deathly silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. Then, from the darkness beyond my flashlight's beam, came a voice. Help. Me. It sounded human, but just barely. The words were slurred, as if whoever or whatever was speaking was having trouble forming them. Hello, I called out, my voice shaking. This is Park Ranger Thompson. Are you hurt? Can you come into the light? A figure stumbled into view, and I had to bite back a scream. It looked like a man, or what was left of one. His skin was pale and stretched tight over an elongated frame. His arms hung down to his knees, ending in hands tipped with long, curved claws. But it was his face that haunted me. Human features twisted and warped, mouth stretched impossibly wide to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Help. Me, it said again, taking a halting step towards me. Make it stop. I backed away, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination, a bad dream. But as more figures emerged from the darkness, each more horrifically transformed than the last, I knew this was no dream. This was a waking nightmare. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or stealth. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, their inhuman shrieks mixing with ultra-human pleas for help. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that dark forest. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror drove me onward. Every tree looked the same, every shadow concealed new horrors. Finally, I burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. In the center stood an old fire tower, its metal frame silhouetted against the starry sky. Hope surged through me. If I could just make it to the top, I could radio for help, figure out where I was. I sprinted across the clearing, the sounds of pursuit growing closer with each step. As I reached the base of the tower, I risked a glance back. They were there, at the edge of the clearing. Dozens of them, their twisted forms barely visible in the moonlight. They milled about, as if unsure whether to follow me into the open. Not waiting to see if they'd make up their minds, I began to climb. The metal rungs were slick with dew, making each step treacherous. But fear lent me speed, and soon I was hauling myself onto the platform at the top. The small cabin was locked, but a few desperate kicks splintered the old wood around the handle. I stumbled inside, slamming the door behind me and bracing a chair under the handle for good measure. Only then, in the relative safety of the fire tower, did I allow myself to catch my breath. My hands shook as I reached for the radio console, praying it still worked. "This is Ranger Thompson," I gasped into the mic. "Emergency situation at the old fire tower in Sector 7. I need immediate evac. There's something out here. Something. Not natural." Static crackled for a long moment, and I feared the worst. Then, miraculously, a voice came through. "Copy that, Thompson. We've got your location. Helicopter is en route. ETA 20 minutes. Can you describe the nature of the emergency?" I laughed, a high, hysterical sound. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? It's the missing campers, I said finally. I found them, but they're changed, mutated somehow. They're not human anymore, but they're not animals either. I don't know what they are. There was a long pause from the other end. When the voice came back, it was different. Older, more authoritative. Ranger Thompson, this is Park Director Simmons. Listen to me very carefully. What you've encountered is a situation we've been monitoring for some time. Under no circumstances are you to engage with these entities. Do you understand? My mind reeled. They knew. How long had this been going on? But sir, I protested, what about the campers? We can't just leave them out there like that. There has to be something we can do. I'm sorry, Thompson, but those people are beyond our help now. Our priority is containment. When the helicopter arrives, you are to board immediately. A team will be dispatched too. Handle the situation. A scrabbling sound from the roof cut off my reply. Something was up there, its claws scraping against the metal. They're here, I whispered into the radio. Oh God, they've found me. Stay calm, Thompson. Help is on the way. Just hold on a little longer. But even as he spoke, I could see long, pale fingers curling around the edge of the window. A face appeared, if you could call it that. Its mouth opening in that terrible, familiar scream. Please, it said, in a voice that was almost human. Help us. More appeared at the other windows, their twisted forms silhouetted against the night sky. They weren't trying to break in, I realized. They were watching, waiting. In the distance, I could hear the thrumming of helicopter blades. Help was coming. But as I looked into the eyes of the creature at the window, eyes that still held a flicker of human consciousness, of unbearable suffering, I knew that rescue would bring its own kind of horror. Whatever had happened here, whatever had turned these people into, it wasn't over. And as the helicopter drew closer, as the creatures retreated into the shadows of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The beginning of something far worse than anything I could have imagined. Story 12. The patient's room was always closed, but tonight, it stood wide open, revealing nothing but years of dust and cobwebs inside. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand still gripping the medication cart. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows across the worn linoleum floor. It was 2 a.m., the heart of the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital, and I was making my usual rounds. But there was nothing usual about what I was seeing now. Room 237 had been a mystery since I started working here 6 months ago. It was always closed, the blinds drawn. None of the other nurses ever went in, and when I asked about it, they'd just shake their heads and change the subject. Don't worry about 237, they'd say. Just leave the meds by the door. Someone will take care of it. And so I had, night after night, leaving a small paper cup with 2 white pills and a glass of water outside the perpetually closed door. Every morning, the cup and glass would be empty, until tonight. The pills from my last round were still there, untouched. And the door was open. I took a hesitant step forward, peering into the darkness beyond. The room looked like it hadn't been occupied in years. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, and cobwebs stretched across the corners. The bed was bare, its mattress yellow with age. How was this possible? I'd been leaving medication here every night for months. Someone had been taking it. Someone had been in this room, hadn't they? A chill ran down my spine as I backed away from the open door. Something was very, very wrong here. I turned to head back to the nurse's station, to call security or my supervisor or anyone who could make sense of this. But as I moved, my foot caught on something. I looked down to see a file folder lying on the floor, its contents spilled across the hallway. With shaking hands, I knelt to gather the papers. They were medical records, yellowed with age. The name at the top of the first page made my blood run cold. Patient, John Doe admitted. June 15th, 1972 diagnosis. Unknown 1972. That was over 50 years ago. How could these records be here, outside a room I'd been delivering medication to just hours earlier? As I flipped through the pages, my confusion turned to horror. The notes described a patient with symptoms that defied medical explanation. Rapid aging followed by sudden youth. Disappearances and reappearances within a locked room. Staff reporting strange noises and unexplained phenomena. The final entry, dated just a week after the patient's admission, simply read, "Patient vanished during night shift. Room to be sealed until further notice." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A prank by the other nurses to scare the new girl. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The dust in that room was real. The age of these papers was real. And the fear I felt right now, that was very, very real. A noise from inside room 237 made me jump. It was soft, barely audible. The sound of sheets rustling, as if someone was turning over in bed. But the room was empty. I'd seen it with my own eyes. Hadn't I? Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I found myself moving towards the open door again. The darkness inside seemed to pulse, to breathe. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" No response. Just that soft rustling sound again. I reached for the light switch, my hand trembling. As my fingers touched the cool plastic, a voice spoke from the darkness. "Nurse." "Is it time for my medicine?" I yanked my hand back, as if burned. The voice was old, frail, and coming from an empty room. I have your medicine here," I found myself saying, not sure why I was playing along with this impossibility. "But sir, your room. It's, yes," the voice chuckled. "It does that sometimes. Don't worry, dear. It'll be back to normal soon enough." As if on cue, the room began to change. The dust seemed to evaporate, the cobwebs disappearing like mist in the sun. Furniture materialized. A nightstand, a chair, a television. And there, on the bed that had been bare moments ago, was an old man. He smiled at me, his eyes twinkling with a youth that belied his wrinkled face. There we are. Much better, don't you think? I stood rooted to the spot, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. Who? What are you? I managed to stammer out. The old man's smile widened. "Oh, I'm just a patient, my dear. Been here quite a while, as I'm sure you've gathered." He nodded towards the file I was still clutching. Fascinating reading, isn't it? Though I'm afraid it doesn't tell the whole story. I looked down at the file, then back at the old man. "But this says you've disappeared." 50 years ago. He shrugged, a surprisingly graceful movement for someone who looked to be in his 90s. Time is a funny thing in this room. Sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes it's 1972, sometimes it's, well, whenever it is now. 2024, I whispered. "Ah, Lovely. A new millennium. How exciting. He clapped his hands together, looking for all the world like an eager child. Now, about that medicine, almost on autopilot, I moved to hand him the paper cup with the pills. As he reached for it, his hand passed right through mine. The cup clattered to the floor, pills scattering across the newly materialized rug. Oh dear, the old man sighed. I'm afraid I'm not quite solid at the moment. Would you mind terribly? I bent to pick up the pills, my mind reeling. What was happening? Was I losing my mind? As I straightened up, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I gasped, nearly dropping the pills again. My hair, which had been a rich brown when I started my shift, was now streaked with grey. Fine lines had appeared around my eyes and mouth, as if I'd aged years in the span of minutes. What's happening to me? I whispered, turning back to the old man. His eyes were sympathetic, but there was something else there too. Hunger. Anticipation. It's the room, my dear. It borrows, sometimes, to keep me here. To keep me alive, after a fashion. I backed away, my heart pounding. I don't understand. What are you? What is this place? The old man sighed, suddenly looking every one of his impossible years. I was a man, once, a scientist. I thought I could conquer death, bend time to my will. I succeeded, after a fashion. But the cost. He gestured around the room. Well, you see the cost? I shook my head, not wanting to believe, not wanting to understand, but deep down, I knew. This room, this man, they were an aberration, a tear in the fabric of reality, and I had stumbled right into it. I can't stay here, I said, backing towards the door. I need to leave. I need to tell someone. The old man's face darkened. I'm afraid I can't let you do that, my dear. You see, I've been so lonely. And now that you're here, now that you've seen. He smiled, and this time there was nothing kindly about it. Well, I think you'll make an excellent roommate. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut before I could reach it. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, I could hear the old man chuckling. Welcome to room 237, nurse. I do hope you'll enjoy your stay. It's going to be a long one. As I sank to the floor, my back against the unyielding door, I could feel the room changing again. The walls seemed to breathe, to pulse with an otherworldly energy. And with each pulse, I could feel myself changing too. Aging, then growing younger, then aging again. Time, it seemed, had lost all meaning in room 237. And as the night stretched on into an impossible eternity, I realized with growing horror that my shift was never going to end. In room 237, the night shift lasted forever, and I was now a permanent part of it. Story 13. Every road led back to the town center, and the residents' eyes never blinked. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white as I made another futile attempt to leave this godforsaken place. The GPS on my dashboard had long since given up, the screen frozen on an error message. No signal found. Not that it mattered. This town, whatever it was called, wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. It had started innocently enough. A long drive, a malfunctioning GPS, and a decision to take what looked like a shortcut. The sun had been setting as I turned onto the unmarked road, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I should have known better. Should have turned around right then, but I didn't. And now, here I was, trapped in a town that shouldn't exist. I'd first realized something was wrong when I tried to leave. No matter which road I took, I always ended up back in the town square. At first, I thought I was just turned around, disoriented by the unfamiliar streets. But after the 5th attempt, the horrible truth began to sink in. I couldn't leave. The town itself was odd. It looked like something out of a 1950s postcard, all picket fences and quaint storefronts. But there was an unsettling perfection to it all. The lawns were too green, the paint too fresh, and the people, God, the people. They smiled constantly, their faces frozen in expressions of placid contentment. But their eyes never moved, never blinked, just stared unwaveringly at whatever happened to be in front of them, including me. I pulled into a parking spot in front of what looked like a diner, my 6th circuit of the town complete. The sign above the door read Mum's Place in cheery neon letters. Through the window, I could see figures seated at the counter, perfectly still. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the car. The air felt wrong, too thick somehow, like trying to breathe underwater. And there was a smell just on the edge of perception. Something sickly sweet and vaguely metallic. The bell above the diner door jingled as I entered, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Every head turned towards me in perfect unison, those unblinking eyes fixing on my face. "Welcome to Mom's," chirped a voice from behind the counter. A woman stood there, her blonde hair piled impossibly high, her smile so wide it must have hurt. "What'll it be, hun?" I swallowed hard, fighting down the urge to run. I'm lost," I managed to say. "I'm trying to get back to the highway, but I can't seem to find my way out of town." The woman's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. Something that looked almost like hunger. "Oh, don't you worry about that, sweetie. Nobody ever really leaves our little town. Why don't you sit down and have some pie?" Best in the county. As if on cue, every patron in the diner turned back to their plates, forks moving in perfect synchronization. The sound of chewing filled the air, a wet, squelching noise that turned my stomach. "No thank you," I said, backing towards the door. "I really need to be going." The woman's smile widened impossibly further, her teeth gleaming too white, too sharp. Now, don't be like that. We insist." Suddenly, hands grabbed me from behind. I hadn't heard anyone approach, but now I was surrounded. The diner's patrons had left their seats and were pressing in close, their skin cold and clammy against mine. "Let go of me," I yelled, struggling against their grip. But it was like fighting against statues. They were inhumanly strong, their fingers digging into my arms hard enough to bruise. They dragged me to a booth, forcing me down onto the cracked vinyl seat. A plate appeared in front of me, piled high with something red and glistening that only vaguely resembled pie. "Eat up, hun," the woman behind the counter said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "You'll need your strength. You're going to be here a long, long time." I stared at the plate, my heart pounding in my chest. The pie pulsed slightly, as if it were alive. And that smell, that sickly sweet, metallic smell, it was coming from the plate. "What is this?" I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away from the writhing mass on my plate. "What are you people?" The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We're just folks, sweetie. Just like you, or, well, just like you will be once you've had your pie." With dawning horror, I realized what she meant. This wasn't just a town I couldn't leave. It was a town that consumed its visitors, that turned them into whatever these things were pretending to be human. I shoved the plate away, ignoring the angry hisses from the creatures around me. I won't eat it. You can't make me. The woman's smile finally faltered, replaced by something cold and alien. Oh, I think you'll find we can make you do just about anything, sweetie. One way or another, you'll join us. They all do, in the end. As if to emphasize her point, the diner's patrons began to change. Their skin rippled and shifted, features melting and reforming into monstrous parodies of human faces. Limbs elongated, joints bending in impossible ways. I screamed, the sound torn from my throat by pure, primal terror. Using strength born of desperation, I shoved my way past the twisted figures, knocking over chairs and tables in my haste to reach the door. I burst out onto the street, gasping for air that still felt too thick, too wrong. The perfect houses now seemed to loom over me, their windows like hungry eyes watching my every move. I ran for my car, fumbling with the keys as inhuman shrieks filled the air behind me. Just as I managed to unlock the door, something slammed into me from behind, sending me sprawling onto the pavement. I rolled over to see one of the creatures looming over me, its face a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth. It reached for me with elongated fingers, drool dripping from its maw. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I lashed out with every ounce of strength I had left, my fist connecting with what passed for the thing's jaw. To my surprise, it recoiled, shrieking in pain. Not waiting to see if I'd actually hurt it, I scrambled to my feet and dove into my car. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking spot, tires squealing on the too perfect asphalt. I drove blindly, taking turns at random, no longer caring which way I went as long as it was away from that diner. The town blurred around me, the picket fences and quaint storefronts melting together into a nightmarish smear. And then, suddenly, I was out. The perfect houses gave way to dark forests, the road narrowing and becoming rougher. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a sign I'd missed on my way in. Welcome to Pleasantville, where everyone's welcome and no one ever leaves. I didn't slow down until the sign was far behind me, until the trees thinned out and I could see the stars again. Only then did I pull over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. For a long moment, I just sat there, gulping in air that finally felt normal again. Had it really happened? Or had I dozed off at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing? But the bruises on my arms were real. And when I looked in the rearview mirror, I could see a smear of something dark and viscous on my cheek. Remnants of whatever that pie had been. It had been real. All of it. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone. To my relief, I had signal again. The GPS app showed my location, about 50 miles off course from where I should have been, but blessedly far from anywhere called Pleasantville. As I set course for home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd escaped something far worse than just a wrong turn. Those unblinking eyes, those too wide smiles, they would haunt my dreams for years to come. And every time I saw a sign for a town I didn't recognize, I'd remember the taste of that too thick air, the sound of inhuman shrieks. I'd remember the town that wasn't there, the town that ate its visitors. And I'd keep driving, never stopping, always afraid that the next turn might lead me back to Pleasantville, where everyone's welcome and no one ever leaves. Story 14. The text message read, "Look outside your window now." And there he was, phone in hand, staring right at me. My blood ran cold as our eyes met across the darkened street. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then, As if realizing he'd been spotted, the figure turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows between the streetlights. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This couldn't be happening. Not again. It had started 3 weeks ago with an innocuous text from an unknown number. "Nice outfit today. Blue really suits you." I'd been wearing a new blue blouse that day, but I figured it was just a wrong number or a friend playing a prank. But the texts kept coming. Always from different numbers, always describing what I was doing with unsettling accuracy. Enjoying that latte. The heart the barista drew is cute. You should get that mole on your left shoulder checked. It looks new. Your cat misses you when you're gone. She sits by the door for hours. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had a secret admirer who was just really observant. Or perhaps one of my friends was playing an elaborate, if unsettling, joke. But as the days wore on, the messages became more frequent, more intrusive. They knew things no casual observer could know. Private conversations I'd had in my own home. Thoughts I'd written in my journal, but never shared with anyone. I changed my number, but the texts kept coming. I went to the police, but without any actual threats or proof of physical stalking. They said there was little they could do. So I'd taken matters into my own hands. I installed security cameras, changed all my passwords, even had a specialist sweep my apartment for hidden cameras or listening devices. Nothing. No explanation for how this person knew so much about my life. And now, finally, I'd seen him. The face behind the texts. It was both a relief and a new source of terror. Relief because I wasn't crazy. There really was someone watching me. Terror because now I knew for certain I was being hunted. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, a new message popped up. Now. Let's not involve the authorities. They can't help you, Sarah. No one can. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. How did he know what I was about to do? Was he still watching me somehow? I ran through the apartment, checking windows, making sure doors were locked. As I passed the bathroom, movement in the mirror caught my eye. I froze, then slowly turned to look. For a moment, I saw a face that wasn't mine reflected in the glass. A man's face. Pale and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Then I blinked, and it was gone, leaving only my own terrified reflection. My phone buzzed again. Against my better judgment, I looked at the message. "Did you see me, Sarah? I'm always here. Always watching." A scream built in my throat, but I choked it back. I couldn't let him know how scared I was. Couldn't give him that satisfaction. With trembling fingers, I typed out a reply. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The response came almost immediately. "I am your silent observer, your constant companion. I want nothing from you but to watch. To know you in ways no one else ever has or will. Leave me alone," I typed back, anger momentarily overriding my fear. "I'll go to the police." "You'll do nothing," came the reply. "Because deep down, you're curious. You want to know how I do it, how I see everything, know everything. Don't you, Sarah?" I stared at the screen, my denial dying on my lips. Because he was right. Beneath the fear and revulsion, there was a part of me that was fascinated. How was this possible? How could someone know me so completely? As if reading my thoughts, and at this point, I wouldn't have been surprised if he could. Another message appeared. "I'll make you a deal, Sarah. Ask me a question. Any question about yourself, something no one else could possibly know. If I get it wrong, I'll disappear forever. But if I'm right, the message trailed off, leaving the consequences unspoken. My hands shook as I considered the offer. This was madness. I should call the police, change my number again, move to a new city. But the curiosity was overwhelming. And if there was a chance to end this, to make him go away for good, before I could talk myself out of it, I typed, "Okay, what's the one secret I've never told anyone? The thing I'm most ashamed of?" I held my breath as I waited for the reply, my mind racing. There were things I'd never told a soul, things I'd barely even admitted to myself. There was no way he could. The phone buzzed. I looked down and felt the world drop out from under me. There, in cold, unfeeling text, was my deepest, darkest secret. The thing I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't real. But it was. And he knew. As the implications of this sank in, my phone buzzed again. "I win, Sarah. Now, shall we discuss the terms of our continued relationship?" I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, as message after message poured in. He laid out, in excruciating detail, how things would be from now on. How he would continue to watch me, to know me. How I would learn to accept his presence in my life, to welcome it even. After all, the final message read, "I'm the only one who truly knows you. The only one who sees the real Sarah." Isn't that what you've always wanted? To be truly, completely known? Tears streamed down my face as I realized the truth of his words. All my life, I'd felt alone, misunderstood. And now, here was someone who saw every part of me, even the darkest corners of my soul. It was horrifying. It was intoxicating. With trembling fingers, I typed out a response. "What do you want me to do?" The reply came instantly. "For now, just live your life, Sarah. Go to work. See your friends. But know that I'm always there, always watching. And when the time comes, I'll let you know what I need from you." Days passed, then weeks. True to his word, my unseen watcher didn't interfere with my daily life, but I felt his presence constantly. In the prickle on the back of my neck when I walked down the street. In the shadow I sometimes glimpsed out of the corner of my eye. The messages continued, less frequent now, but no less unsettling. He would comment on my choices, offer unsolicited advice, sometimes even praise me for decisions I'd made. Slowly, horrifyingly, I found myself starting to rely on his input, to crave it, even. I'd find myself hesitating before making decisions, wondering what he would think. It was a month after our deal that the message I'd been dreading finally came. "It's time. Sarah, I need you to do something for me." My hands shook as I read his instructions. What he was asking. It was wrong, illegal. But the thought of disobeying, of losing the one person who truly knew me, was unbearable. So I did it. And when it was done, when I stood there with blood on my hands and terror in my heart, my phone buzzed one last time. "Well done, Sarah. You're finally ready." Look in the mirror. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I raised my eyes to the mirror above my bathroom sink. For a moment, I saw only my own reflection, pale and trembling. Then, like a veil being lifted, I saw the truth. The face in the mirror was mine, but the eyes were his, had always been his. There was no stalker, no outside observer. There was only me, and the fractured pieces of my psyche that had been watching, judging, controlling. I was the watcher. I was the watched. I was both the prisoner and the cage. As this realization washed over me, I felt something inside me shift and settle. The fear drained away, replaced by a strange sense of peace. I picked up my phone one last time and typed out a message to myself. "Hello, Sarah. Are you ready to truly see yourself?" And as I stared into my own eyes in the mirror, I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I was no longer alone. I was finally, truly, completely known. Story 15. The whispers grew louder as our flashlights died, and I realized with horror that we weren't alone in the abandoned asylum. "Guys, did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Mark and Jess exchanged glances, their faces pale in the fading glow of our dying flashlights. We'd come to the old Ravenscroft asylum on a dare, armed with cameras and an unhealthy dose of bravado. Now, as darkness closed in around us, that bravado was rapidly evaporating. "It's probably just the wind," Mark said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. We'd been exploring the decaying building for hours, our excitement growing with each creepy discovery. Rusted gurneys in cobweb-strewn corridors, padded cells with scratches on the walls, an operating theater that still held the faint, sickly sweet smell of decay. But as night fell and our flashlight batteries began to fail, the atmosphere had shifted. The air grew thick and oppressive, carrying whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Maybe we should head back," Jess suggested, her camera hanging forgotten around her neck. I nodded, relief flooding through me at the thought of leaving this place behind. But as we turned to retrace our steps, I realized with growing dread that I didn't recognize us. "Guys," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, "do you remember which way we came?" Silence fell as we all looked around, trying to get our bearings. The corridor stretched out in both directions, identical peeling doors lining the walls. In the dim light of our fading flashlights, every shadow seemed to move. Every door seemed to hide unspeakable horrors. "Let's just pick a direction and stick to it," Mark said finally. "We're bound to find the exit eventually." We set off down the corridor, our footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. The whispers continued, growing in volume and clarity with each step. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was undeniably sinister. Suddenly, Jess stopped short. "Did you see that?" she hissed, pointing towards a doorway we'd just passed. I turned, squinting into the darkness. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, a flicker of movement, a pale face, gaunt and twisted, peering out at us before vanishing back into the shadows. "Run!" I yelled, all pretense of calm forgotten. We took off down the corridor, blind panic driving us forward. The whispers rose to a crescendo, becoming screams that seemed to come from the very walls around us. As we ran, doors began to slam open and shut of their own accord. Ghostly hands reached out from the darkness, grabbing at our clothes, our hair. The air grew colder, our breath coming out in visible puffs, despite the summer heat outside. We turned a corner and found ourselves in what must have been the main lobby. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, illuminating a scene of decay and abandonment. Overturned furniture littered the floor, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. "There!" Mar shouted, pointing towards a set of heavy double doors. "That must be the way out." We sprinted towards the doors, hope giving us a final burst of speed. But as we reached them, the whispers suddenly stopped, plunging us into an eerie silence. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but the door didn't budge. Panic rising, I pulled harder, then threw my shoulder against it. Nothing. "It's locked," I said, my voice breaking. "We're trapped." As if in response to my words, a low chuckle echoed through the lobby. We huddled together, our backs against the unyielding door, as figures began to emerge from the shadows. They were patients, or what was left of them. Ghostly forms in tattered hospital gowns, their faces twisted in expressions of madness and pain. They moved towards us with unnatural grace, their feet hovering inches above the dusty floor. "What do we do?" Jess whimpered, her fingers digging painfully into my arm. Before anyone could answer, a new voice cut through the chaos. Now, what do we have here?" "Some new patients for old Ravenscroft." The ghosts parted, revealing a man in an old-fashioned doctor's coat. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and gleaming with an unsettling light. Unlike the other apparitions, he seemed solid, real. "Welcome," he said, spreading his arms wide. "I am Dr. Ravenscroft, and this is my asylum. We've been so looking forward to some new subjects." "This isn't real," Mark muttered beside me. "It can't be real." Dr. Ravenscroft's smile widened, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "Oh, I assure you, young man, this is very real. The boundary between your world and ours has always been thin here. And you've so thoughtfully crossed over to join us." As he spoke, the ghostly patients pressed closer, their cold presence seeping into my bones. I could feel their madness brushing against my mind, threatening to pull me into the abyss of their insanity. "Please," I begged, finding my voice at last. "We didn't mean any harm. We just want to leave." The doctor skegged, shaking his head. "Leave? But my dear, you've only just arrived. And we have so much to learn from you. So many new treatments to try." With a wave of his hand, gurneys appeared, ghostly orderlies stepping forward to grab us. I fought against their grip, but their spectral hands were impossibly strong. As they strapped me down, I caught glimpses of Mark and Jess struggling nearby. Jess was screaming, the sound cutting off abruptly as a ghostly hand clamped over her mouth. Mark was muttering to himself, his eyes wide and unfocused. He'd already started to slip away. Dr. Ravenscroft loomed over me, a rusted scalpel materializing in his hand. "Now then," he said, his voice filled with terrible eagerness, "let's see what makes you tick, shall we?" The scalpel descended, its cold edge pressing against my forehead. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the pain, but it never came. Instead, I heard a loud crash, followed by surprised shouts. My eyes flew open to see sunlight streaming into the lobby. The ghostly figures were retreating, hissing and writhing as the light touched them. Standing in the now open doorway was an old man, his weathered face set in grim determination. In one hand he held a crowbar, in the other a flashlight that he swept across the room, driving the spirits back. "Come on," he shouted at us. "Move before they regroup." We didn't need to be told twice. Somehow, the ghostly restraints had vanished with the spirits, and we scrambled off the gurneys and towards the door. As we burst out into the cool night air, I gulped in deep breaths, never having appreciated oxygen so much in my life. Behind us, inhuman shrieks of rage echoed from the asylum. "Keep moving," our rescuer urged, herding us towards an old pickup truck parked nearby. They can't leave the building, but their influence can stretch pretty far. We piled into the truck, which roared to life and peeled away from the asylum. As we drove, the old man introduced himself as Frank, a former groundskeeper who'd made it his mission to keep people away from Ravenscroft. "I was too late for some," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I've managed to save a few. You kids are lucky I was making my rounds tonight." We drove in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The horrors we'd witnessed, the narrow escape we'd made. It all seemed surreal in the mundane interior of Frank's truck. Finally, as lights from the nearby town came into view, Jess spoke up. What would have happened if you hadn't shown up?" Frank's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Best not to dwell on that, miss. Let's just say that Ravenscroft and his patients have ways of keeping people. Ways that don't necessarily require a living body." A chill ran down my spine at his words, and I found myself checking my reflection in the side mirror, half expecting to see a ghostly face staring back. As Frank dropped us off in town, extracting promises that we'd never return to the asylum, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd brushed against something far beyond our understanding. The boundary between worlds, as Dr. Ravenscroft had called it. In the days that followed, as we tried to resume our normal lives, I noticed changes. Mark would sometimes stare off into space, muttering equations that made no sense. Jess developed a fear of the dark so severe she couldn't sleep without every light in her apartment on. And me, I started hearing whispers again. Not the menacing ones from the asylum, but softer, almost enticing, promising knowledge and power beyond my wildest dreams, if only I'd returned to Ravenscroft. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself looking up directions to the old asylum. My finger hovers over the screen, tempted to plot a course back. Back to the whispers, back to the madness, back to Dr. Ravenscroft and his terrifying treatments. So far, I've resisted, but I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time. Because once you've crossed that boundary, once you've seen what lies beyond, you never truly come back. Story 16. The passenger pulled out a gun, insisting we lose them, but I couldn't see anyone following us. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The GPS on my phone cheerfully announced the next turn, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding in my car. I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching the wild, paranoid eyes of my passenger in the back seat. This was supposed to be an easy night. A few airport runs, maybe some bar hoppers. Nothing I hadn't done 100 times before as an Uber driver. But when I picked up this guy, mid-30s, disheveled, reeking of sweat and fear, I knew something was off. He'd jumped into the car, barely waiting for me to unlock the doors. "Drive," he'd barked, his voice ragged. "Anywhere. Just go." I'd hesitated, my hand hovering over the ignition. "Sir, I need a destination to start the trip." That's when he'd pulled out the gun. Now, as we sped through the empty streets of the city, I struggled to keep my breathing steady. "Sir," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm, "I don't see anyone behind us. Are you sure we're being followed?" He leaned forward, his breath hot on my neck. There, he hissed. "They're always there. You can't see them, but they see us. They see everything." A chill ran down my spine. Who was they? And what had this man done to think he was being pursued? "Look," I said, trying a different approach. "Maybe if you tell me what's going on, I can help. Are you in some kind of trouble?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Trouble? Yeah, you could say that. I've seen things I shouldn't have seen. Know things I shouldn't know. And now they want to make sure I never tell anyone. My mind raced. Was he some kind of whistleblower? A witness to a crime? Or just a paranoid schizophrenic off his meds? Before I could ask anything else, he suddenly shouted, "There? Did you see that? They're catching up. Drive faster." I pressed down on the accelerator, the engine of my old Civic whining in protest. The streets were a blur as we weaved through traffic, running red lights and narrowly avoiding collisions. All the while, I saw nothing unusual in my mirrors. No pursuing vehicles, no mysterious figures. Just the normal, late-night traffic of the city. "Where are we going?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "We can't just drive around forever." He was quiet for a moment, and I dared to hope he was coming to his senses. Then, the docks. "Take us to the docks." I nodded, relief washing over me. At least now we had a destination. Maybe, once we got there, I could talk him down, get him to put the gun away. As we neared the waterfront, the streets became more deserted. The smell of salt and fish filled the air, mixing with the musty odor emanating from my passenger. Warehouses loomed on either side, their dark windows like vacant eyes watching our progress. "Stop here," he suddenly commanded. I pulled over, cutting the engine. For a moment, we sat in silence. The only sound our ragged breathing and the distant lapping of waves against the pier. "Get out," he said, his voice low and menacing. My heart sank. This was it. He was going to kill me and dump my body in the harbor. I'd become another statistic, another cautionary tale for rideshare drivers. With trembling hands, I opened my door and stepped out into the cool night air. He followed, the gun never wavering from my direction. "Walk," he ordered, gesturing towards one of the warehouses. As we approached the building, I noticed something odd. The padlock on the door was broken, hanging uselessly from the latch. Had someone else been here recently? My passenger noticed it too. He cursed under his breath, his eyes darting around wildly. "They're here," he muttered. "They've found us." Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, yanking me through the door and into the darkness beyond. The warehouse was cavernous, filled with stacks of crates and the lingering smell of fish. Our footsteps echoed as he dragged me deeper into the gloom. Suddenly, a noise from above made us both freeze. It sounded like skittering, like dozens of little feet scurrying across the metal rafters. "No," my passenger whispered, his voice filled with terror. "No, no, no, not here. Not now." I turned to look at him, and in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows, I saw his face transform. The paranoia and anger melted away, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. That's when I saw them, descending from the ceiling on gossamer threads. Creatures that looked like a nightmarish fusion of spider and human. Their bodies were pale and bloated, with too many limbs moving in impossible ways. Where their faces should have been, there were only clusters of gleaming black eyes. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My passenger wasn't so inhibited. His shriek of terror echoed through the warehouse as he fired wildly at the descending horrors. The gun's report was deafening in the enclosed space, but it seemed to have little effect on the creatures. One of them landed on his shoulder, its spindly legs wrapping around his neck. He thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge it, but more were descending, covering him like a writhing, pale shroud. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. The man's screams grew muffled, then stopped altogether as the mass of creatures enveloped him completely. Then, as one, They turned their attention to me. Survival instinct finally kicked in. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the concrete floor. I could hear them behind me, that horrible skittering sound growing louder as they gave chase. I burst out of the warehouse, gulping in the cool night air. My car was just ahead, the keys still in the ignition. Freedom was so close. Something wrapped around my ankle, sending me sprawling onto the rough asphalt. I kicked wildly, feeling my foot connect with something soft and yielding. There was a high-pitched shriek, and the pressure on my ankle released. Scrambling to my feet, I made the final, desperate lunge for my car. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut. Just as pale, twisted limbs reached for me. The creatures swarmed over the car, their weight making the suspension groan. With shaking hands, I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, throwing off some of the creatures. I drove blindly, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. As I sped through the empty streets, I could see them in my rearview mirror. Not chasing, but watching. Their cluster of eyes gleamed in the red glow of my taillights, growing smaller as I put distance between us. I drove for hours until the first light of dawn began to color the sky. Only then did I allow myself to slow down, to breathe, to think about what had happened. The police found my passenger's body 2 days later, washed up on the shore near the docks. The official report cited an apparent drug overdose as the cause of death. There was no mention of gunshots, no sign of the horrors I had witnessed. I tried to tell them, of course, about the gun, the chase, the creatures in the warehouse. They listened politely, then gently suggested I seek counseling for the trauma of finding a dead body. Sometimes, I wonder if I imagined it all. If the stress of the job, the late nights, the constant vigilance had finally caused me to snap. But then I'll catch a glimpse of something pale and twisted in my rearview mirror. Or I'll hear that faint skittering sound coming from a dark alley as I drive past. And I know, with chilling certainty, that it was all real. They're out there, watching, waiting. And one day, they'll come for me again. Because I've seen things I shouldn't have seen. I know things I shouldn't know. And they can't let me tell anyone. So I keep driving, night after night. But now, when a passenger gets in and tells me to just drive, I feel a flutter of panic in my chest. Because I know that sometimes, the real horror isn't the person in the back seat. It's what's chasing them. Story 17. The muddy footprints led to the attic. A space my sister swore was inaccessible when she asked me to house sit. I stood at the bottom of the narrow staircase, my heart pounding in my chest. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I aimed it upwards, illuminating a trail of brown smears on the worn wooden steps. They looked fresh. This was supposed to be an easy week. My sister, Emily, and her husband were celebrating their 5th anniversary with a Caribbean cruise. Just water the plants and check the mail, she'd said, pressing the house key into my palm. Oh, and don't worry about any noises from upstairs. The attic's been sealed off for years. Probably just squirrels in the walls. But there were no squirrels that could leave footprints like these. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe Emily had been mistaken about the attic. Maybe her husband had been up there recently and forgotten to mention it. Or maybe something was very, very wrong. Gripping my flashlight like a weapon, I began to climb. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house. The air grew thicker as I ascended, carrying a musty odor that made my nose wrinkle. At the top of the stairs, I found myself facing a door. It looked old, its paint peeling and cracked, but the hinges were shiny and new, recently oiled. Someone had been using this door. Recently, my hand shook as I reached for the knob. Part of me wanted to turn back, to run out of the house and never look back. But I couldn't leave without knowing. I had to be sure Emily was safe. The door opened with a soft click, swinging inward to reveal the attic beyond. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a space that was anything but abandoned. The floor was clear of dust, and there were clear signs of recent habitation. A sleeping bag was rolled up in one corner. A camping stove sat on a small folding table, surrounded by empty food wrappers. But it was the walls that made my blood run cold. Every inch of available space was covered in photographs. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them. And every single one was of Emily. Emily leaving for work. Emily shopping at the grocery store. Emily and her husband at a restaurant. Intimate moments through windows that should have been private. In many of the photos, she was circled in red, with cryptic notes scrawled in the margins. Soon, mine. Forever. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of sick joke. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the attic. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of a figure ducking behind a stack of boxes. Pale skin, wild eyes. A face I didn't recognize. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Show yourself." Silence. Then, a low chuckle that raised the hair on the back of my neck. "You weren't supposed to be here," a voice said, raspy and cold. Emily was supposed to be alone. I backed away, my free hand fumbling for my phone. I needed to call the police, to warn Emily. "Stay back," I warned, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I've called the cops. They're on their way." Another chuckle, closer this time. "No, you haven't. Your phone has no signal up here." I made sure of that. My back hit the wall, and I realized with horror that I was trapped. The intruder was between me and the only exit. "What do you want?" I asked, stalling for time. Maybe if I kept him talking, I could find a way out of this. "What do I want?" The voice repeated, a hint of amusement coloring the words. "I want what's mine. Emily is mine. She just doesn't know it yet." The figure stepped into the beam of my flashlight, and I had to bite back a scream. He was gaunt, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. His hair was long and matted, his beard unkempt. But it was his eyes that terrified me the most. They burned with a fanatical light, focused and intense. "How long have you been here?" I asked, my mind racing. How had Emily not noticed? How had I not noticed until now? He smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "Longer than you'd believe. This house has secrets, passages hidden in the walls. I've been watching, waiting for the perfect moment." As he spoke, he moved closer, his hand reaching out towards me. I pressed myself harder against the wall, wishing I could melt through it. "Please," I begged, "just let me go. I won't tell anyone. You can leave, start over somewhere else." His smile widened, turning cruel. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. Can't have you warning Emily, now can we?" He lunged forward suddenly, his hands grasping for my throat. I ducked, pure adrenaline giving me speed I didn't know I possessed. I darted past him, making a break for the door. But he was faster than I expected. His hand closed around my ankle, sending me crashing to the floor. The flashlight flew from my grasp, rolling away and plunging the attic into darkness. We grappled in the gloom, his weight pressing down on me as I fought to break free. His hands found my throat, squeezing with terrifying strength. Spots danced in my vision as I gasped for air. This was it. I was going to die here, in this dusty attic, at the hands of a madman obsessed with my sister. But as my consciousness began to fade, my flailing hand struck something solid. The flashlight. With the last of my strength, I gripped it tight and swung. There was a sickening crack as it connected with the side of his head. His grip loosened, and I took in a desperate gasp of air. I scrambled away, my hand finding the door handle. I yanked it open and half fell down the stairs, not daring to look back. I ran through the house, sobs tearing from my throat. I had to get out, had to get help. As I burst out the front door, I collided with someone on the porch. Strong hands gripped my shoulders, steadying me. "Whoa, easy there," a familiar voice said. "What's wrong?" I looked up to see Amelie's husband, concern etched on his face. Behind him, Amelie was climbing out of their car, looking confused. "What are you guys doing here?" I gasped, looking wildly between them and the house. "You're supposed to be on a cruise." Emily approached, her brow furrowed. "We forgot some important documents. Came back to get them before heading to the airport." Her eyes widened as she took in my appearance. "Oh my God, what happened to you?" The words poured out of me in a rush. The footprints, the attic, the photos. The man who'd been living in their walls. As I spoke, Emily's face drained of color. Her husband immediately called the police, his voice tight with controlled anger. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police swarmed the house, but found no trace of the intruder. The attic was empty, the photos gone. If it hadn't been for the bruises on my throat, I might have thought I'd imagined the whole thing. In the days that followed, as Emily and her husband dealt with changing locks and installing security systems, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. The man had vanished so completely, had erased his presence so thoroughly. It wasn't until weeks later, as I was helping Emily pack for their rescheduled vacation, that I found it. A small scrap of paper that had fallen behind her dresser. On it, in the same handwriting I'd seen in the attic, were two words that made my blood run cold. Still watching, I showed it to Emily, watching the color drain from her face once more. We both knew, in that moment, that this nightmare was far from over. Somewhere out there, he was still watching, still waiting, and next time, we might not be so lucky. Story 18. The dark figure looming over my daughter's bed wasn't imaginary, and it definitely wasn't friendly. I froze in the doorway, my hand still on the light switch. The bedtime story I'd been about to read slipped from my fingers, landing on the carpet with a soft thud. In the dim glow of the nightlight, I could see my 5-year-old daughter, Lily, sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. And there, standing at the foot of her bed, was a tall, shadowy figure. "Daddy," Lily exclaimed, seemingly oblivious to my horror. "You're just in time." Mr. Whispers was about to tell me a story. Mr. Whispers. The name sent a chill down my spine. For weeks, Lily had been talking about her new friend, an imaginary playmate who visited her at night. My wife and I had brushed it off as a typical childhood phase. But this was no product of a child's imagination. The figure turned slowly, and I caught a glimpse of what passed for its face. Where features should have been, there was only a swirling darkness, like smoke trapped behind glass. 2 pinpricks of light cold and alien, served his eyes. "Lily," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm, "I need you to come here." "Right now," she pouted, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "But Daddy, Mr. Whispers was just now, Lily." The sharpness in my tone surprised even me, but it had the desired effect. Lily scrambled out of bed and ran to me, wrapping her arms around my legs. The figure, Mr. Whispers, made no move to stop her. It simply stood there, watching us with those piercing points of light. "What a shame," it said, its voice a soft hiss that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We were just getting to the good part of the story. I scooped Lily up in my arms, backing out of the room. "Stay away from my daughter," I warned, though I had no idea how I could possibly enforce such a demand against whatever this was. The thing tilted its head, an unsettlingly human gesture from such an inhuman form. "But she invited me," it said, amusement coloring its whispery voice. "I cannot enter without an invitation. You know the rules." "Rules? What rules?" My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This had to be a dream, a hallucination. Things like this didn't happen in real life. But the weight of Lily in my arms, the pounding of my heart, it all felt too real to be a dream. "Daddy," Lily's voice was small and frightened now. She could clearly sense my fear, even if she didn't understand its source. "What's wrong? Why are you scared of Mr. Whispers?" I clutched her tighter, my eyes never leaving the shadowy figure. "Lily, honey, did you really invite this Mr. Whispers to your room?" She nodded against my chest. "He said he was lonely and needed a friend. I told him he could visit whenever he wanted." The creature's form seemed to ripple with satisfaction. "You see, I was invited. I have every right to be here." "Well, I'm uninviting you," I snapped, desperation making me reckless. "Get out of my daughter's room. Get out of our house." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the figure began to fade, like mist dissipating in sunlight. Just before it vanished completely, it spoke one last time. "This isn't over. She invited me once. She'll do it again." And then it was gone, leaving nothing but a lingering chill in the air. I slammed the door shut and carried Lily to our bedroom, where my wife was already asleep. I shook her awake, my words tumbling out in a panicked rush as I tried to explain what had happened. To her credit, she listened without interruption, her face growing pale as I described the creature in Lily's room. When I finished, she pulled Lily into a tight hug, her eyes meeting mine over our daughter's head. I could see my own fear and confusion mirrored there. "What do we do?" she whispered. I shook my head, at a loss. What could we do against something like that? Call the police, a priest. Who would believe us? We spent the rest of the night huddled together in our bed, Lily sleeping fitfully between us. Every creak of the house, every shadow cast by passing cars, made us start. By the time dawn broke, we were exhausted but too wired to sleep. Over breakfast, we tried to gently question Lily about Mr. Whispers. Her answers were frustratingly vague, colored by a child's limited understanding and vocabulary. But a few things became clear. The entity had been visiting for weeks, always at night, always when she was alone. It told her stories, strange tales that she couldn't quite remember in the light of day, and asked her questions about our family, our home, our lives. "He said he wanted to be part of our family," Lily said, pushing her cereal around her bowl. "He said he could make all our wishes come true if we let him stay." My wife and I exchanged glances. The implications were terrifying. This thing, whatever it was, had been gathering information about us, laying the groundwork for what? We spent the day researching, scouring the internet for any information about shadow creatures, night visitors, anything that might explain what we were dealing with. We found plenty of folklore and myths, but nothing concrete, nothing that told us how to protect ourselves. As night fell, we prepared for another vigil. We moved Lily's things into our room, determined not to leave her alone for a second. Salt lines were poured across every threshold. Crosses hung over every door. We pulled out every bit of supernatural protection we'd ever heard of, no matter how silly it seemed. But as the hours ticked by and nothing appeared, we began to relax. Maybe it was over. Maybe our rejection had been enough to drive the thing away for good. We should have known better. It was just past midnight when Lily sat up in bed, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Mr. Whispers," she said, her voice distant and dreamy. "You came back." My wife and I were instantly alert, our eyes scanning the room. But we saw nothing. No shadowy figure, no glowing eyes. "Lily," I said cautiously, "there's no one here. It's just us." She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No, Daddy. He's right there." She pointed to an empty corner of the room. "He says he's sorry for scaring you. He just wants to be friends." A chill ran down my spine. Was the thing invisible to us now? Had it somehow gained more power over our daughter? "Tell him to go away, Lily," my wife said, her voice shaking. "Tell him he's not welcome here." Lily's face fell. "But he's my friend. He says if you don't want him, he'll take me somewhere else. Somewhere we can be together forever." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I could see my breath misting in the air as I spoke. "Lily, listen to me. That thing is not your friend. It's dangerous. You need to tell it to leave, right now." She looked torn, her gaze flickering between us and the empty corner. Then, to our horror, she began to slide out of bed. "He says I should go with him now," she said, her voice eerily calm. "He says you don't understand, but you will someday." We lunged for her, but an invisible force knocked us back. Lily walked towards the corner, her hand outstretched as if to take someone else's. "No," I shouted, struggling against the unseen power holding me back. "Lily, stop." For a moment, she hesitated. Then she turned back to us, and my heart nearly stopped. Her eyes were different, older, somehow, and filled with an alien intelligence. "You can't protect her forever," Lily said, but it wasn't her voice. It was the whispery hiss of Mr. Whispers. "She's mine now. She'll always be mine." Then Lily blinked, and she was herself again, looking confused and frightened. The oppressive force in the room vanished, leaving us gasping in its wake. We held Lily close that night, neither of us daring to sleep. We knew this was far from over. Whatever Mr. Whispers was, it had gotten a foothold in our lives, in our daughter's mind, and it wasn't going to let go easily. In the days that followed, we sought help from every source we could think of. Priests, paranormal investigators, child psychologists. Some tried to help, others dismissed us as delusional. But none of them could fully banish the shadow that now hung over our lives. Lily still speaks of Mr. Whispers sometimes, in unguarded moments. We catch her whispering 2 empty rooms, drawing pictures of a tall, dark figure, And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear a soft, hissing voice, just on the edge of hearing, spinning stories and making promises. We're still fighting, still searching for a way to protect our daughter. But deep down, I fear it may already be too late. Because once you invite the darkness in, it never truly leaves. It just waits for another chance to consume you whole. Story 19. The chanting grew louder as night fell, and I realized with horror that my campsite was surrounded by hooded figures. I huddled in my tent, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This was supposed to be a solo camping trip, a chance to clear my head and reconnect with nature. The Blackwood Forest was known for its pristine wilderness and challenging trails. But no one had mentioned anything about cults. It had started innocently enough. As I hiked deeper into the forest, I'd noticed strange symbols carved into the trees. At first, I dismissed them as graffiti from previous campers. But as they became more frequent, more intricate, a sense of unease began to grow in the pit of my stomach. Then came the whispers, soft at first, barely audible over the rustle of leaves and the chirping of birds. But as the day wore on, they grew louder, more insistent. Words in a language I didn't recognize, chanted in a rhythmic cadence that made my skin crawl. By the time I set up camp in a small clearing, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. That's when I saw the first hooded figure, standing motionless at the edge of the trees. I blinked, and suddenly there were more, forming a circle around my campsite. Now, as full darkness descended, their chanting reached a fevered pitch. The words were clearer now, and though I still couldn't understand them, their meaning was unmistakable. They were calling something, summoning it. A twig snapped just outside my tent, and I nearly screamed. A shadow fell across the fabric, the silhouette of a robed figure clearly visible. "Come out, traveler," a voice rasped, somehow audible over the chanting. "It's time for the offering." Offering? The words sent a chill down my spine. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that I was to be that offering. "Please," I called out, hating the tremor in my voice. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me go, and I'll leave. I won't tell anyone what I saw." A low chuckle came from outside, devoid of any warmth or humor. "Oh, but you can't leave now. You've been chosen. The forest has called you here for a purpose." The forest. What was he talking about? Before I could ask, hands grasped the tent, ripping it away. I found myself exposed, surrounded by dozens of hooded figures. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but I could feel their eyes upon me, hungry and expectant. The one who had spoken stood directly in front of me. Unlike the others, his robe was adorned with intricate symbols, similar to those I'd seen carved into the trees. In his hand, he held a gnarled staff topped with a strange, pulsing crystal. "Welcome," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Welcome to the heart of Blackwood. We've been waiting for you." I scrambled to my feet, looking wildly for an escape route. But the circle of cultists was unbroken, a wall of dark robes blocking any path to freedom. "I don't understand," I said, playing for time. "What do you want from me?" The leader tilted his head, and though I couldn't see his face, I sensed he was smiling. We want nothing from you. It's the forest that wants, that hungers. And you, my friend, are the feast it has been craving." As he spoke, the chanting grew louder, more frenzied. The very air seemed to thicken, pressing in on me from all sides. And beneath it all, I heard something else. A low, rumbling sound, like the growl of some massive beast. It was coming from the ground. I looked down and nearly lost my balance. The earth beneath my feet was moving, pulsing, like a giant heart beating just below the surface. "What is this place?" I whispered, horror and awe warring for dominance in my mind. The leader laughed, a sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. "This is the true Blackwood Forest. Not the sanitized playground humans think they know, but the living, breathing entity that has existed here for millennia. And it is hungry." As if in response to his words, the ground began to split open. Thick, root-like tendrils emerged, writhing and reaching towards me. I tried to back away, but found my feet rooted to the spot, as if the very earth was holding me in place. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I don't want to die." The leader stepped closer, his voice almost gentle now. "Die? Oh no, you won't die. You'll become part of something greater. Your essence will feed the forest, and in return, you'll live on as part of it. Isn't that beautiful?" I didn't find it beautiful. I found it terrifying. But as the tendrils began to wrap around my legs, I realized I was powerless to stop it. The chanting reached a crescendo, the cultists swaying in unison. The leader raised his staff high, the crystal at its tip glowing with an otherworldly light. "Great Blackwood," he cried out. "We bring you this offering. Accept their life force and grow ever stronger." The tendrils tightened, pulling me down. I could feel the earth opening beneath me, ready to swallow me whole. In desperation, I lashed out, managing to grab the leader's staff. To my surprise, it came free easily. The crystal pulsed in my hand, warm and alive. The leader stumbled back, his hood falling away to reveal a face twisted in shock and anger. "No," he shouted, "the staff. Return it at once." But even as he spoke, I felt a surge of energy course through me. The tendrils loosened, retreating back into the ground. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and I found I could move again. Acting on instinct, I raised the staff high, mimicking the leader's earlier gesture. "I reject your offering," I shouted, my voice stronger and more confident than I felt. "I am not yours to take." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the earth beneath us heaved. The cultists were thrown to the ground, their chanting cut off abruptly. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, pushing past the fallen figures, the staff still clutched tightly in my hand. Behind me, I could hear shouts of anger and confusion, but I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Only then did I allow myself to slow down, to try and get my bearings. To my shock, I realized I was at the edge of the forest. Through the trees, I could see the parking lot where I'd left my car just yesterday. Had it only been a day, it felt like a lifetime ago. As I stumbled towards my vehicle, I finally allowed myself to look at the staff I'd stolen. The crystal at its tip was dark now, its earlier glow faded, but as I watched, cracks began to form along its surface. With a soft tinkling sound, the crystal shattered, falling away to reveal a small seed nestled inside. It pulsed gently, reminding me uncomfortably of the beating earth in the cultists' clearing. For a long moment, I stood there, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to throw the staff away, to forget everything that had happened in that forest. But another part, a part I didn't quite understand, knew that wasn't an option. Whatever had happened back there, whatever I'd stumbled into, it wasn't over. The seed in my hand was proof of that. It was a responsibility now, though I didn't yet know what that meant. As I climbed into my car, my hands shaking as I turned the key, I knew two things for certain. First, I would never set foot in Blackwood Forest again. And second, I needed to learn more about what I'd experienced. About the living forest, the cult that worshipped it, and the strange power I'd inadvertently tapped into. Because something told me that even though I'd escaped, the forest wasn't done with me yet. And next time, I needed to be prepared. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot, leaving Blackwood behind. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In my rearview mirror, the dark line of trees seemed to shift and move, as if waving goodbye. Or perhaps, I thought with a shudder, it was beckoning me to return. Either way, I knew this was only the beginning. The true horror I feared was yet to come. Story 20. The figure at the end of the hallway didn't move when I called out, but all the lights in the building suddenly went out. My heart leapt into my throat as darkness engulfed me. The cleaning cart I'd been pushing clattered to a stop, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the empty office building. I fumbled for the flashlight on my belt, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to switch it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the nigh empty hallway. The figure was gone, had I imagined it. I'd been working as the night janitor at Greenwood Financial for 6 months now, and nothing like this had ever happened before. Sure, the place could be creepy at night. All empty office buildings were, but it had always felt normal, safe. Until tonight. It had started with small things. Doors I knew I'd locked found open. Items moved from where I'd left them. The feeling of being watched, even when I knew I was alone in the building. I'd brushed it off as nerves, the product of too many late nights and too much coffee. But now, standing in the pitch-black hallway, my flashlight beam trembling as I swept it back and forth, I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was very, very wrong. "Hello," I called out, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. "Is anyone there? The building's closed, you know. You can't be in here." Silence was my only answer. Not even the usual hum of the air conditioning system broke the stillness. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath, waiting. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. There had to be a logical explanation for this. Maybe a homeless person had snuck in, tripped the circuit breaker somehow. Yeah, that had to be it. I turned towards the utility closet where the breaker box was located. It was just down the hall, past the row of executive officers. I could reset the power, then call security to do a sweep of the building. Easy. Each step felt like a mile as I made my way down the hall. My flashlight beam bouncing off gleaming nameplates and dark computer screens. The beam caught something on the floor ahead, a dark smear that looked horribly like blood. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. That hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. I'd mopped this floor not an hour ago. As I stood there, debating whether to investigate or run, a sound broke the silence. A soft thud, like something heavy being dropped, coming from one of the officers to my right. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I turned towards the sound. The door to the CEO's office stood ajar, a sliver of deeper darkness visible through the gap. "Hello," I called again, cursing the tremor in my voice. "Mr. Thompson, is that you?" It wasn't impossible that the CEO might be working late, though I'd never seen him here at this hour before. But as I pushed the door open, I knew immediately that it wasn't Mr. Thompson in the office. The room was in chaos. Papers were strewn everywhere, drawers pulled out and emptied onto the floor. The large oak desk was overturned, its surface scarred with deep gouges that looked like claw marks. And there, crouched in the corner, was a figure. It was hunched over something, making wet, squelching sounds that turned my stomach. I must have made a noise, a gasp, a whimper, I'm not sure, because the figure suddenly went still. Slowly, it turned to face me. I'd like to say I was brave, that I stood my ground, demanded answers. But the truth is, when I saw what was in that office, I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted down the hallway. I could hear it behind me, a scrabbling sound of something moving far faster than any human could. I burst through the stairwell door, taking the steps 3 at a time in my desperation to reach the ground floor. The sound of pursuit was closer now, a rhythmic thudding that seemed to shake the entire stairwell. I hit the lobby at full speed, not slowing as I crashed through the glass doors onto the street outside. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away. Only then, gasping for breath and shaking with adrenaline, did I dare to look back. The Greenwood Financial Building loomed in the distance, its windows dark. There was no sign of anything following me. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, ready to call the police. But as the screen lit up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was 3:47 a.m., exactly the same time it had been when I first saw the figure in the hallway. Impossible. I'd been running for at least 10 minutes. A text message popped up on the screen from an unknown number. "Come back. We're not finished yet." I dropped the phone as if it had burned me, watching in horror as the screen flickered and died. When I picked it up again, the message was gone. But I knew what I'd seen. The next few days passed in a blur of police interviews and sleepless nights. I told them everything. About the figure, the darkness, the thing in the CEO's office. They searched the building but found nothing out of place. No overturned furniture, no claw marks, no blood. They concluded that I must have fallen asleep on the job, had some kind of vivid nightmare. Even I began to doubt my own memories. Maybe it had all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But then the news reports started. People going missing from the area around Greenwood Financial. Strange noises reported by nearby residents in the middle of the night. And worst of all, sightings of a dark figure in the windows of the upper floors, long after the building should have been empty. I tried to move on, to forget what had happened. I found a new job, in a small shop that was never open past sunset, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That whatever I'd encountered that night was still out there, waiting. A week ago, I received a letter. No return address, just my name, written in an elegant, old-fashioned script. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words that made my heart stop. The position is still open. I knew, without a doubt, that it was from Greenwood Financial. An invitation, or a summons, to return. Part of me wants to run, to pack up and leave town, never looking back. But a smaller, darker part whispers that I need to know. Need to understand what happened that night. What's really going on in that building after hours. Tonight, I stand outside Greenwood Financial, staring up at its dark windows. In my pocket is the master key I never returned, heavy with the weight of possibility and dread. I know I shouldn't go in. Know that if I do, I might never come out again, at least not as the same person I am now. But the pull is irresistible, the need to know overwhelming. As I fit the key into the lock, I see movement in one of the upper windows. A figure, watching, waiting for me. I turn the key, hearing the lock click open. Whatever happens next, I know one thing for certain. This time, I won't run.